We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. We've got a packed show. We've got plenty of questions, but not oodles and oodles and oodles this week, which worked out really well because as Tom teased last week, for those of you who are listening, we got some first impressions of some very, very anticipated speakers, and this week, Tom is ready. It's here now. We've got the full review. Take it away, Tom.
Oh my God, taking pictures of glossy speakers sucks.
Okay.
Can I just start with that? So there's
we should probably start with the name of what it is that we're reviewing.
It's the title of the podcast.
You never know. Somebody might have just
SVS Ultra Evolution Bookshelf speakers. So they're new.
SVS Ultra Evolution brand new series bookshelf speakers.
I'm going to talk about the Ultra series and the Evolution series. Okay. So the Ultra series was the initial series.
Okay.
That was the ones that they had. I have the Ultra bookshelves.
Right.
And then there's the Ultra Evolution bookshelves. We're going to just call those the Evolution so that
For the sake of some brevity. Yes.
Yes. I don't want to keep having to say Ultra over and over.
Okay.
So, the first thing I did when I saw those pictures of the Evolution speakers was I was like, those things look freaking huge. Okay. They look really big. So I was concerned, and I think that maybe a lot of potential buyers were also concerned that, hey, I've got the Ultras. I'm thinking of maybe getting the Evolutions.
Okay.
How's that going to work? Like, am I have to buy new stands? Do I have to, if I built little enclosures for them, or they're sitting in a very specific spot that only has a specific amount of room around them?
Right.
They are almost exactly the same size.
Okay.
They are, you could probably look at the dimensions and figure that out. But I'm not looking at dimensions. I think a lot of people aren't. They just look at the stupid pictures like I did. If you look at SVS's pictures of their Evolution series bookshelf speakers, you will often see that sometimes, like, the side of the speaker is not glossy.
Okay.
Okay? And the reason that is because they photoshopped it out. Because it is nigh
likely.
Impossible to take pictures of these damn things. Okay?
You're going to have a reflection of whatever is taking the picture.
And you see it all over the place. And you see them in my pictures too. You see, because I took them outside and took pictures next to this big old tree I have in my backyard. Took them outside, put them on identical stands next, so the Evolution and the Ultras right next to each other, so that you could see the comparison. And they are so remarkably close in size. The tweeter is at the exact same height. You don't have to worry about that. The speaker height is almost identical, if not identical. Of course,
the width of the front face.
Yeah, just about the same.
Yeah.
So you really can just drop these into your system if you want to. So there's at least one picture that I took where I had to Photoshop out my feet, and I'm not good at that. Okay, but I did it anyways. So if you find it and you point it out, you're not going to win any prizes. Okay, but I was like,
you didn't use AI, Tom?
I didn't use AI. I did it myself. It took me a while to figure out how to do it because I don't ever do stuff like that. But I was very proud of myself. I actually showed it to my wife, and when I showed it to my wife, she said what you would expect her to say, which is, "Are those speakers broken?" Because she saw the front were finally. She finally noticed that they're in the home theater. They're still in the home theater right now. And she never noticed that the front was
so Tom is referring to it's not exactly a smooth curve to the front face of these speakers. It's kind of like the tweeter is more or less vertical, right? It's not really raked back on the tweeter side of things.
No, the woofer is pushed forward and angled up slightly.
There you go. Yeah, so it's kind of a rake back for the woofer only. So it's not a smooth curve. It's kind of like an angle, like a kink, a leg kick out in the front face there.
Yes, my love. I dropped both these speakers directly on top of a dowel. You caught me, and now I have to send them back because that's how physics works. She's an engineer. She knows this, but she was just like, "Oh, I've never seen a speaker that looks like that," which is good. Okay.
And so largely the point, I think.
Yes, largely the point. All right. So let's talk about all the things that people in this podcast are going to care about.
Okay.
Most.
Yes.
Okay. Because there's going to be a lot of stuff. We've already talked about how the time alignment of the drivers is stupid and it doesn't really make any audible difference. We know this. Okay. We should all know this. If you don't know this, I'm sure Rob can link us up to the previous podcast where we talked about it. I have an article about what's the deal with angled speakers, which kind of addresses all of that as well. The idea, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about basically why I think these speakers are still a good deal. Now, first of all, when the original Ultra series came out, they were $1,000 a pair, $500 each. Yes. Okay. These are $100 more. They're $600 each.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, $100 more per speaker.
Speaker.
Per pair, it's $200 more.
So first of all, you're not paying that much of a premium over the Ultras that you got before.
That could quite literally be explained by inflation. Like if the Ultras had just remained around but had a price increase due to inflation, it wouldn't be like completely inexplicable given the environment today.
That's exactly right. And I don't have any inside information about this, and I'm not making any claims that this is true. But in my mind, in my conspiracy theory, whatever you want to call it, I just think that, at some point they were like, listen, we can't keep making these speakers for this price. The Ultra series is becoming to the point where they're becoming too expensive to make. We need to increase the price.
Or it was like when they did the manufacturing run on the tweeters and the woofers of the old Ultra series, they ordered a massive amount of them, and at some point you have to decide, well, do we either do another manufacturing run of those very same parts, or is it time to do a little bit of upgrading? And sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes you don't have a choice in the matter. That's a materials availability thing or a tooling availability thing in a manufacturing facility. And so there can be every reason why you basically get to the end of your stock of parts from the previous series. It's time to bring in a new series for logistic reasons of that.
So there are a lot of manufacturers out there, speaker manufacturers out there, who will slap a V2 or a V3 or a V4 at the end of their speaker
or
run.
A Mark if you're fancy.
If you're fancy, they'll put a Mark because they saw the first Iron Man. They're like, Mark 2. Anyways, they'll do that and then hand wave away some claims of improvement on the crossover design and better drivers or different drivers or whatever, but the speaker looks exactly the same.
Right.
I mean, from outside, it looks exactly the same, but it's like, oh, that's the Mark III.
And that often makes sense because probably the single most expensive component of any speaker is the cabinet. So if you are coming to a Mark II, a version 2 or whatever, and you're able to keep the same cabinet, that saves a lot of money if you're able to do that.
So in my mind, what I'm thinking is they got to the point where they needed to make a decision about whether or not they're going to raise the price of their Ultra series. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. And when they did, they were like, well, we can just raise the price and then come up with some explanation for it because other than, and like Rob said, inflation could have been an explanation. Everybody would be like, yeah, I know everything's getting more expensive. Yeah. They could have done that. Or they were like, you know what? If we're going to raise the prices, let's just improve it. Let's just make it better in some way. And the Ultra series were already very well reviewed, very well received, very well respected. They achieved a remarkably flat frequency response within the range. Well. And so sonically, if you thought that you were going to get the Evolution series and put them next to the Ultra series and you're going to hear a massive difference, you're going to be disappointed. These speakers, not only, by their own marketing claims, they're like, they timbre match with all the rest of this. Of course they do. They're all flat speakers. They all sound kind of the same. So do they have a little bit more output? They do. They're a little bit more sensitive.
Okay. That's not insignificant to bring in a new series and have them. It's not like wildly. It's not like it's 89 versus different. 97 or something like that. Yeah. This is a decibel or two. But look, you put in the same amount of amplifier power, you stay at the same distance, and they have a little bit more output. That's not an insignificant thing.
I agree.
And not a cost-free thing to do either.
That's right.
Actually, I saw a little bit of somebody who, just opened up the new Ultra Evolution Bookshelf speakers and just took a look at the drivers and stuff that's inside and they're using an overhung voice coil, meaning that the coil of wire is larger than the magnet that it's acting against, the metal former inside. Right. The coil is larger. Now that costs money because like just having that coil of wire be larger, that's just material cost, having more metal in there. But that's one way that you can make a driver a bit more efficient rather than having the coil be smaller than the piece of metal that it's going around and only traveling within the distance of that bobbin. Now you have this wider voice coil and that moves back and forth. You have more electromotive force that way, and that makes it more efficient.
So the other thing they claim is more bass response. That's kind of what they're saying. And I don't, because of how I review speakers, you're not going to see that in my review. Sure. Because I don't care.
It's
I don't
so
care how low your bookshelf.
What's going to actually end up happening? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't care how low your bookshelf speakers can, as long as they get down to 80 hertz flat. Yeah. That's as far as plus a little bit. That's as far as they need to go. Okay. So you're not going to see that. But so there is some sonic improvements. Okay. They're just minor when they compared to everything else. As far as aesthetic improvements, though, they are major. They are not. Okay. They're not minor in any way, shape, or in my mind. They're not. The gloss finish has always been impeccable from most speaker manufacturers. It's not like you get bad ones. So these are no different. I just think the overall look of the speaker is better. I think that the only real if you read through my review, other than me not gushing over how much better they sound, because I don't think they sound that much better. I think they sound pretty much the same. Yep. Which by the way,
not a bad thing.
Not.
Because
that is not a knock. It's not like everything has to like stomp out the previous version. That's not like how these things work. Even though, like laundry detergent manufacturer, 60% more effective than our previous formulation. And you look at it like the how much you're supposed to use is 60% more. Well, okay. Yeah. All right. I got it. Yeah. You guys can do math. I can too. So, as far as the aesthetics, though, they're just so much better looking. And not only that, they're meant to be looked at. Okay. So there's a magnetic grille on the front instead of the normal grille. And I like that because it makes it so that if you do take the speaker grille cover off, which on these speakers, there's no problems with that. There's a grate over the tweeter, so you don't have to worry about that. And the woofer doesn't have a bubbled out dust cap, so you don't have to worry about that getting pushed in.
It's the inverted dust cap, so it just looks like a continuous dome type shape going in there. Yep.
And that means that these are very easy to take the grills off, which is good because the only real fit and finish downside I have on these things is that the magnets just snap into place on top of the metal surround around the woofers.
So like the sort of like the face plate of the tweeter, the outer perimeter of it, and the metal edge around the perimeter of the woofer, that's the metal that the magnets are attaching to.
Which is not great because what ends up happening is that the grill can be slightly off center and kind of tweaked to the side a little bit, and it will stay in place. Most magnetic grills, what they do is they embed some sort of metal within the
behind the face
baffle
of the speaker somewhere.
Yeah, and then so that the magnets really snap into place just right at those points, and it aligns it perfectly. So that is literally the only downside with these speakers that I can find as far as fit and finish. They really are meant to have those grills taken off, and I think the
seems
grills
that way. Yeah, because there's not going to be any push pin holes since they are held on magnetically, so it is a smooth looking face on the front. Although the screw heads for the faceplate that is holding in the tweeter and the perimeter of the woofer, those are visible. So it's not like they have hidden screw things on the front of the face there. Yeah.
Sometimes you'll see that.
Sometimes you see that, things, they hide it.
Not in this case. Sonically, I did a bunch of listening tests. I did the whole thing where you get your face really close to the speaker and kind of go back and forth and try to hear, the off-axis dispersion and differences there. I don't know that I could have picked out these speakers versus the Ultra speakers versus the Evolution speakers in a blind test. It did seem to me that the mid-range was a little bit bumped up in comparison to the Ultras. The Evolutions just seemed like maybe a little bit more of the mid-range, and the off-axis response seemed a little bit better than the Ultras, but I don't think I could pick it out in a blind test. And I think that if you were, first of all, this is not a huge price increase. It really isn't. And no one's going to walk into your room and go, which version of the Ultras do you have? There, it's gonna be like, oh, you got the Evolutions. That's awesome.
Readily apparent immediately from the looks. And I mean, they are claiming that cover that has this sort of organic lattice-like structure, like the holes in the cover on that tweeter are kind of irregularly and inspired by an organic shape. And like they did claim that is acting as a bit of a high-frequency lens to help broaden the dispersion of the sound. So I mean, it's possible that once we get really good objective measurements that we trust, that there might be an objective difference in the dispersion of the speaker tweet high frequencies.
But I'm going to tell you, no matter what the measurements tell you, it's not this dramatic thing.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking to yourself, I was thinking about getting the Ultras. Do I think that there's a reason to buy the Evolutions over the Ultras? And I think there is. And I think the aesthetics are the reason.
Okay.
And that's why I titled the review, they finally look as good as they sound, because that is the upgrade. The upgrade is the looks, to me.
Sure.
That is the upgrade.
Yeah, so if you
I think
already
that sonically, you're
own-
not going to find that much of a difference.
Yeah, if you already own the original Ultra series, it's going to be pretty hard to say purely on audio performance it's worth upgrading all of my Ultra series speakers to Ultra Evolution, because if you're expecting to do that and then notice some gigantic change in the sound quality, that's going to be a challenge. Although I'll give them enough credit.
You may hear it, but it'll be psychological.
Or it could be the thing where if you have replaced 7 former Ultra series speakers with Ultra Evolution and you didn't touch anything about your volume or trim level settings, the fact that they are like a decibel and a half more efficient, that's enough to very realistically get you to go, oh, I prefer the Evolutions. That might be the very reason they did
That might be, yeah. And I'll tell you what, I don't think that you would necessarily have to touch your Odyssey. I think it's very, very close to what the other ones would. I will say that the person who's like, I've got the Ultras, they're really straining in my room. And I feel like if I had just a little, I know that if I had a little, just like a dB, dB and a half more output, like if you are that person, then you're like, okay, that there is a legitimate sonic reason for me to buy these.
Okay.
But I think aesthetically, you're fine. I think that just the look of the speakers overall is so much better that I recommend them just as highly as I recommend the Ultras. Okay. So my recommendation doesn't change because I don't think the monetary difference is so great that the aesthetic improvements aren't justified. You know what I mean? Yep. So you're getting something for that extra money, and if they had just slapped another $100, they just put out a press release. Hey, inflation. I know it sucks. We've been trying to keep these prices down for as long as we can, but we can't any longer. They're going to cost $100 extra. Get them now while you can before the price increases.
And don't forget,
nobody would have complained.
The cost of shipping has definitely gone up, and they include the cost of shipping the speakers to you in the price. Plus, there's all the shipping costs involved in like making the speaker and getting it to their warehouses before they ship it out to you. So that is like justification, honestly, for the price.
I mean, a lot of times we say once you get to that $500 to $1,000 for bookshelf speakers, you're in that price point where you're like you're getting some really quite good speakers usually. And these still fall well within the low end of that range. So, I have no problems recommending. I'm not an apologist. If they had sucked, I would be telling you.
Sure.
I would have no problems with that.
Now, I mean, we do have to be critical of your review, Tom, because I don't believe when I skimmed through your review this morning that you went to the extent of taking out the jumpers in the back of the dual binding posts that come installed on these speakers, and you didn't buy amplify them or buy wire them. So, there's all that performance that could have.
They're really going to love the part when they get to the issue where I listen to them in stereo mode with my subwoofers engaged, and then turn the subwoofers off so that I just heard the speakers.
The bass management is on. The crossover in the AV receiver is engaged, but the bass is not being played by the subwoofer anymore.
That's why like the low end, I was like listening to sweeps. They just fell off exactly the same. I mean, it was like no difference whatsoever. Like all that extra bass response you're supposed to be getting, which is, I mean, they have a bigger port on the back.
Yeah, you can visually see that the port on the back is bigger than the original Ultra series. Yep.
I would expect all that. So I still think these are, I mean, I recommend them just as highly. I think $100 more and a better looking cabinet, a more unique cabinet. Definitely. I mean, that alone is worth something, because how many boxy speakers are there out there? There's so many. And this one, at least you look at it, you go, wow, That's a little different.
There's a little visual difference, and they are available in that very lovely gloss white, and then they're also available will be available in a black oak finish. That's coming very soon. They will be available in that black oak finish. So you have some finish options there too, which is a little nice because it doesn't just have to be glossy. So
my Ultras are in the black oak, and these are glossy. And if you're like, well, I wonder, how much they reflect light. A lot. They reflect a lot of light, like a mirror. Like you can see the image.
Wouldn't be ideal to have the glossy black center directly below a projection setup screen. There's going to be a reflection there.
This doesn't bother me that much. I see it and go, oh, yeah, and then I stop paying attention to it. But for people who are sensitive to such things, I'd wait for the black oak. But other than that, highly recommend it.
Okay.
Go out there and get them. All right, Rob, what did you watch?
Yeah, so watched a couple of movies this week. I'll start off with talking about Brooklyn, which came out several years ago. That is Saoirse Ronan. She is the main star. She's honestly the only person in this movie that I recognized. This is I would term this movie in a word, quaint. That's the word that comes to mind. It is. Again, I'm doing a lot of these very straight-ahead dramas. This is an immigrant story. This is 1950s, an Irish immigrant girl coming all by herself to New York, and it's basically her first year in New York. And then an event that goes on back home in Ireland that draws her back there, and the sort of emotional struggle of loving her home and loving the new life that she's begun in New York, and having that bit of a tug of which direction am I going to go? That's sort of the crux of this movie. But one of the reasons it's so quaint is that it's not like she doesn't have any hardships. It's not that she doesn't have an emotional decision to make when we get towards the end of this movie, but it's just like, this is maybe one of the easiest immigration tales that I've really ever seen portrayed. Like, she has a job waiting for her in New York because her sister's really well respected at home in Ireland. She has a great relationship with the Catholic church that's in Brooklyn, in the area where her sister is moving. So that church has gone ahead and already set her up with a place to have lodging and a job waiting for her, and like people to support her when she gets there. And it's kind of like, okay, not everybody had that. That's a pretty good situation to come into. I mean, look, you're still going to be homesick, and they have that. You're still going to have bad experiences. But like, everybody she interacts with in this movie is like the most honest, nicest person you can possibly imagine. Like, the person she ends up sharing a room with on the boat trip over, the most helpful person you could ever hope to, randomly end up in the same room as the, guy that she meets and falls in love with very quickly. Like, the nicest man who has ever existed, to the point of, maybe I don't really believe that this guy is even real, but it doesn't make some kind of weird twist. It's not like we're introducing him as being this overly nice, and then it turns out he's got a dark side. It's like, nope, he's just that nice. The people she's lodging with, like, there's other girls who are staying there, room and board, and it's like the worst thing they do is kind of giggle at her when she falls in love. It's like, it's really, really, really pleasant throughout. So like I say, it's not like she doesn't go through any emotional hardships or anything like that, but it's a little bit difficult to say that there was like really any conflict in this movie. So yeah, it's nice. It's a very pleasant watch. If you just want something that isn't going to emotionally damage you and is going to be a nice relaxing watch, then look, Saoirse Ronan is always exceedingly charming and a very good actress, so you can watch it for that. But that's my take on Broken. The other movie I watched, Shin Godzilla. After having watched Shin Kamen Rider last week, I'm like, yep, I gotta go there and watch Shin Godzilla. And yeah, this is definitely a new take on Godzilla. This is not the same Godzilla story. He's definitely introducing new ideas. I don't want to ruin any of the sort of surprise of what's going on with Godzilla himself, but I got such a kick out of this movie because there's a Godzilla. He's stomping around Tokyo. There's damage and destruction happening. But this movie is a political satire. That's what the movie is about. It is pillorying the political structure in Japan, and basically just showing like there's just so much redundancy in the government and like so many people in between the source of information and who actually make the decision. And they have this like hilarious satirical scene where like this one piece of information has to go through like 7 people who are literally beside each other. So they're just turning their head from side to side to pass the message along until it finally gets up to the prime minister, who's like, yes, let's do it. And then it has to go all the way back down those chain of people to the person who's actually going to carry it out. Like it's that type of political satire, very on the nose, very, very overt, but really quite a hilarious take on things. So it's not a scary movie at all. It's a funny movie, but I do want to credit the effects that are done here because this director, what he's so good at is really doing those visual homages to the original source material, going right back to the original Godzilla. And it's like, yes, this is a computer-generated new Godzilla that we're seeing, but he uses the same shot composition, especially early on in the movie, to give you that sense of this is a person in a rubber suit like it was in the original, very much evoking that. But then it took me going through about half of this movie for it to kind of clue into my brain. I'm like, wait a second. The entire city that I'm seeing is computer generated. And like I didn't notice it until now. Like it's really well done, because you have this creature where you're like, well, it's good effects, but it's on purpose. Kind of looks like a guy in a rubber suit, and that's not like because they made a mistake. It was very much intentional for it to have that look. But then Godzilla is doing things that a guy in a rubber suit could not do because it is computer generated. But I'm like, everything around, all the destruction that's going on, I'm like, wait a second, that's like just excellent CGI on a shoestring budget.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about this movie, and I've heard the same thing that keeps that same sort of Godzilla aesthetic, but somehow manages to do it with very little money and all of it being on the green screen.
That's right. Nuts. Yeah. But I did want to say, I'm of course watching this in original Japanese language with subtitles. That would be fine, except that they made it like, honestly, it would be so helpful if you spoke Japanese to watch this movie, because it is very fast dialogue. It is very short, rapid cuts. So from person to person, really, really rapid cuts.
Yeah, that's tough.
The dialogue is going a mile a minute, which I'm, of course, having to read. But it's not just that. Normally, even that I'm okay with. It's that nobody says each other's names or positional titles. And so they're actually writing the title of the person who's speaking, at least the first time that they speak in the movie, they write that above their head at the same time that the dialogue is written below them in the subtitles. And it, like, trying to take it all in, I'm like, I can't remember a single person's name or position because I just couldn't keep up reading both of those things at the same time while the dialogue was going so fast and the scenes were so short and cut together so quickly. So I mean, I don't actually know. I haven't seen the original Japanese version that, would have had it in kanji, and maybe the positional titles are being written above their head in kanji, and then there wouldn't be subtitles to read because you could actually just understand the dialogue being spoken. But yeah, it was a challenge to watch in that way because it's just so much to read so quickly, and I was kind of like, oh, I'm honestly missing what's going on screen because I'm just trying to read too quickly. So be forewarned, this is one that I'm definitely going to watch like 2 or 3 times so that I can try and take in a bunch of stuff that I missed the first go through.
Yeah, that's what I've been in movies, not been in the movie, but watched movies like that where the subtitles go by so quickly, just like you give up and you turn on the dubbing. Yeah. And sometimes what I'll do, or what I have done is I will turn on the dub and the subtitles at the same time and see how close they are.
Sure. Yeah.
And if they're close enough, I'm like, we're just going to do the dub.
Yeah.
And
especially when you still have a bunch of text to read above all these people's heads, and the locations are labeled that way too, right? To tell you where they are. They got the locations written out at the top of the screen. So it was a lot of reading.
Yeah. A big screen. You're going like this the whole time, looking up, looking down. All right. So I hurt myself at work. I injured my foot and dropped something heavy on it, and it swole up. It's fine. I don't think I broke anything. It seems to be fine. It's almost almost completely better. Most of the swelling is gone. So I had a lot of time to watch stuff this week.
Okay.
So
there's the silver lining.
There's the silver lining. So I watched The Batman. Did I talk about that last week? I didn't, right?
You didn't talk about it last week. I'm trying to recall if you had watched it before. I thought you had watched it before.
I had watched it before.
Oh, okay.
I did. I watched it on my projector, and I think that the bulb was like on its last legs when I watched it, but I might be wrong about that. But the difference in the dark scenes, of which there are nothing but dark scenes in this movie, the difference in the quality of the just the number of things I could see,
the shadow
within the dark
detail,
scenes
the just above
just
black,
astonishing.
Right.
You know, so I will say I'm able with my Sony player to force Dolby Vision.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about in a little bit. And Dolby Vision came out just fine. And got everything sounded great. Everything looked great. Watched the whole movie. There was just so much more detail than I had seen before. And I've already talked about the movie. Yes, the man needs to walk faster. I think we can all agree that Batman...
Oh, but he's supposed to be like an old school gunslinger. He's even got spurs for some reason.
Why does he cling when he walks? Like, that doesn't seem very ninja-like.
Sounds like an old school gunslinger. No, this is a heavy plotting Batman. This is not a ninja Batman whatsoever.
Batman who's got plenty of time on his hands to fight crime.
Oh, he wants you to know he's coming and have plenty of time to get scared.
And I really like that the first one or two times that happened. After that, I'm a little bit over it. And this, I think I liked it a lot more the second time. And it's not just because of the shadow detail, though that did definitely help. And I wasn't like, what the hell's going on?
Right.
But I feel like knowing that you have to remember that there's other plot lines because they're going to ignore them for a big, long period of time, definitely helped me enjoy the movie a little bit more. And I thought I still think Robert Pattinson is one of my... I think he's probably my favorite Batman, to be honest with you. I really do feel like he's the one where you're like, you see him as Bruce Wayne, you see him as Batman, you're like, that is not the same person.
Right. Yeah. You don't immediately recognize the jawline and go, yeah, there's no way anybody could not tell that that's him.
Yeah, and I do love the fact that his face makeup is running down his face and stuff like that. And he takes the mask off and stuff. You're like, that's exactly
Batman.
I know. It's like Batman the Crow, which is probably why I like it.
That's right.
I did also watch Deadpool 2 in again in Dolby. No, that one's not in Dolby Vision, so it's just regular HDR. And I don't think that I really noticed that much of a difference, to be honest with you, between that watching it on the projector. It was certainly brighter.
The shade of red of his suit is a deeper shade of red on now that you have the full deep color capability.
Yeah, no, I didn't notice that.
Oh, okay.
So whatever. So that was fine. I watched every single episode of X-Men 97.
That is available. That's 6 episodes that were available. Yeah.
Yes. So I watched all of those.
Okay.
Rob's, I agree with almost everything Rob has said, which is that they are rushing. It's like very fast.
Very condensed storytelling.
You get some whiplashes like, we're in love. Oh, I don't trust you. Oh, we're in love. I'm in love with somebody else. I'm like, that's like 3 minutes.
It's like
3 minutes.
Bullet point storytelling, pretty much, is what
this
it felt
story
like
is written like they don't think they're getting the second season. Basically.
Yeah, this is like 3 seasons worth of content so far in 6 episodes.
This is like, I think the first 2 or 3 episodes is like all of Rebels. Every that much plot went into 3 episodes. I will say, never include. I love Ian McKellen. Don't get me wrong. Never have I seen a Magneto that is as impressive as this Magneto is. He is absolutely terrifying. Like he walks on, you're like, listen, because he's got the stupid 90s.
He's got
terrible costume,
the giant
with the big
M.
and the arm warmers. I'm like, what is his shoulders exposed? Like, what is he going for here? Like muscle shirt and arm warmers. Like he gets up every morning and goes, man, I'm nailing it. Look at this. And with that, you're like, oh God, what a loser. And then he starts talking. You're like, okay, all right. And then he starts using his power. You're like, Jesus. That man.
And it
do
is
not mess with him.
The combination of some really finely written dialogue plus the vocal performance. He pulls it off. Absolutely pulls it off.
I still hate Jubilee. I don't care.
Okay.
I've always hated Jubilee. I think she's dumb. Same thing with Dazzler.
I like the new upgraded animation for her, though. I like her facial animation in this.
Absolutely. But overall, if you're an X-Men fan, or even if you're not, this is certainly worth watching. I will say it's very funny to me. People complain about my generation, because Gen X, and how all we watched was really super violent cartoons like Wile E. Coyote and Bugs Bunny and all that stuff, and the Roadrunner, and I see the cartoons these days that are made for kids. I think they're made for kids. I'm like, my cartoons were. Invulnerable Coyote keeps getting abused by a
you were never
genius mastermind,
worried for his actual mortality. You
never
knew
at
he
all.
was going to be just fine the very next scene.
So yes, there was physical violence all over the place, but it was also like not emotionally traumatic.
Right.
And these cartoons are like,
what
by the
came
way,
to be known as cartoon violence, right? Cartoon violence, very violent in the moment, but you don't take it seriously.
When did cartoons turn into Game of Thrones? You have to worry about your favorite character dying. It's so bad.
Well, that's why. Yeah, you haven't said it specifically. So episode 5 that I gushed about last week.
Yep.
I have to know if it got you the way it got me.
It didn't get me quite as bad as you, because you kind of set me up for it. You kind of set me up for it. But yes, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They brought it.
They're not messing around over here. You don't get too connected. There was just there's some really good scenes in this thing. So definitely worth watching for those of you that care about such stuff. I don't think the animation is great. I think it's fine. But it's also supposed to be in 1997 animation.
It's supposed to still be recognizable as a continuation of the original series, yes.
Yeah, and that's fine. Lastly, I watched Wrath of Man.
Okay.
Which is a Jason Statham movie on Hulu,
I wasn't able to place it from the title, so yes.
Yeah. I don't know if that ever came out in theaters or not. It's not great.
Okay.
I don't know. It's like I'm all for your John Wick revenge things, and this one tried to sort of set it up, but I just don't quite I never quite understood what was he, a secret agent? Was he
he's
a criminal
Jason Statham,
kingpin?
That's who he
kingpin
is.
Or something like that? He had I never quite understood what was going. I understood what his motivation was. That was easy. That wasn't that hard. And I understood he was a badass. That's fine. I got no problems with that. But they kind of set this whole thing up I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, let's not dwell on it, because we're well into this podcast, and we should.
I will say that the HDR on Hulu is messed up.
Yeah.
It is not good. It is very dark. You cannot see anything. HDR on Hulu is terrible. So, all right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to the website, find our show notes, our Flickr album, so you can follow along with the pictures, as well as our older episodes. I guess we're on facebook.com/AVRant podcast, youtube.com/AVRant. Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His social media handles is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. If you want to support us financially, you can go to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leave us a PayPal donation. Or you can go to patreon.com/AVRant podcast, where you can sign up to become a monthly contributor to the podcast. Every month, Patreon will take some money from you, a minimum of $1.
Yeah.
$12 a year. A whole $12 a year. Inflation, baby. Yeah, and it's not really inflated. And we give most of it to us. So we have 132 patrons. So we want to thank all of you.
Yeah, that's right. Once again, that is patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 132 patrons over there. Thank you for your financial support.
If you can't support us financially, we understand. Just support us in some way. We'll mention you here. Aaron is back again with yet another Canadian movie code for Rob to test. So Rob tested it. Did it work?
It worked.
Oh, well, there you go, Aaron. Now you can use it.
This was one of the ones that gave me no choice but to try it on Apple iTunes as the only place to redeem it. We have very limited selection here in Canada, and we don't have the movies anywhere that cross-pollinates across different services. So, yes, there are many different digital libraries going on if you're a Canadian.
No, sucks to be you. James set some very specific instructions for settings that might help my den receiver pass through Dolby Vision signals from my Apple TV 4K. So, when I got that email, I had almost literally just figured out that maybe there was a workaround here. Mm-hmm. So what happened was I forced Dolby Vision through the X700, Sony X700 Ultra HD Blu-ray player, so that I could get Dolby Vision for the Batman.
Yes.
Okay. And when I did that, I lost my on-screen volume readout.
Right.
And I was like, I wonder if turning off my on-screen display and turning off video processing will fix this.
Yeah.
So I went and did all that and then tried it, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay.
The auto switching on the Apple TV 4K still did not work. No.
Still did not work. So then James sent this email, and I was like, okay, well, he sent some other settings that maybe I could play with, and I tried them, and it still did not work.
Yeah.
But we were two minds think alike. Great minds,
It was
James.
worth a shot. Didn't cost any money, so that was all
certainly
right.
Didn't. Yes. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Aaron, who says, thanks to Rob and Tom for all your hard work to entertain us for 2+ hours every week. Jay, Mike, Karl, and Dan. So thank you to all of you for thanking us.
Yeah, that's right. I'll say those names one more time. Aaron, Jay, Mike, Karl, and Dan. Thank you very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We certainly appreciate it. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
So, in the news, Sony announced their 2024 TV lineup, which is actually a mix of brand new naming convention for the newest and mostly high-end models, plus carrying over a bunch of models that first came out in 2023. Let's dig in. Mm-hmm. At the top of the heap is a new Bravia 9 series. These are LCD TVs using mini LED backlighting that aim to get as close to Sony's own HX3110 4000 nit mastering monitor as possible via their new XR backlight master drive. And cue the Infinite Gary questions about a TV he's not going to buy. Sony has developed a new, much smaller and more powerful dimming zone chip that not only allows them to pack in more zones of local dimming, but also to control each dimming zone's gradation such that the backlight, all by itself, creates something akin to a low-resolution black and white image behind the TV's LCD layer. Priced at $3,300 for 65 inches, $4,000 for the 75 inches, and $5,500. Did I say that right? $3,300 for the 65, $4,000 for the 75, and $5,500 for the 85. The Bravia 9 series goes right up against the likes of LG's G4 series OLEDs in terms of price. 2023's A95L Quantum Dot OLED series will carry over and remain in the 2024 TV lineup. Then comes Bravia 8 series. These are new. These are WOLED TVs using panels from LG Display. They do not have micro lens array. So this is pretty much a straight replacement of the A80L series. $2,000 for the 55, $3,400 for the 65, and $4,900 for the 77. So the Bravia 7 series can sort of be considered the replacement for the X93L series. At least the 7, 8, 9 makes more sense.
Yes, we had a listener who was like, is Tom going to be happy that we just have Bravia 7, Bravia 8, Bravia 9?
I am.
That is simpler.
I am happy.
No question about it.
I am very happy about that because that's the other naming convention sucked.
Yeah.
It gets a scaled back version of the Bravia 9's XR backlight master drive with fewer zones of local dimming and lower peak brightness, but it still has the enhanced gradations for each zone, resulting in better black levels and a lot less blooming. Or you can get no blooming and just buy no OLED. Right. $1,900 for the 55, $2,300 for the 65, and $2,800 for the 75, and $3,500 for the 85. The popular X90L series carries over from 2023 and hopefully will be replaced by something with a single number next year. And finally, the new Bravia 3 series is quite basic with just a direct LED backlight and a 60 Hz LCD panel for all you people who say, I don't really need all that special stuff.
That's right.
Why does my screens look cloudy? I don't know. Maybe because you bought a crappy screen. The 7, 8, and 9 series all use Pentonic 1000 chipset, so they will include 2 HDMI ports capable of supporting 4K resolution all the way to Dolby Vision at 120 Hz with VRR. And that 3 series will not.
That's right. Yeah. And so it is 2 out of the 4 HDMI ports are the full 48 gigabits per second bandwidth and support for Dolby Vision all the way up to 120 hertz. There are not that many TVs that do Dolby Vision all the way up to 120 hertz with VRR. So these new Sonys can do that, but only on 2 out of the 4 ports. And one of those 2, full bandwidth ports is the eARC port. So if you are trying to plug in, 2 video game systems that both go up to 4K 120 and then also use eARC, it's like, well, your AV receiver is still going to need to have at least one HDMI 2.1 port of its own.
Yeah. On the audio side of things, Sony is going with their new Bravia naming. There's a Bravia Theater Bar 8 with 11 drivers built in.
I know.
And a Bravia Theater Bar 9 with 13 drivers. Seems like a missed opportunity here.
Does
to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, 2 of those drivers are up firing, and 2 of them are shooting out to the sides, trying to bounce sound off of your side.
11 minus 4 is not 8. So
right.
I don't know how they got
13,
there.
13 minus 4
is 9. Yes.
We got there.
Yeah, that was accidental on their part.
I think
sure.
it was, yes.
But the interesting one is the new $2,500 Bravia Theater Quad system that looks to replace the wireless HT-A9 that got quite a bit of buzz last year. The idea is the same. There's a small control box that plugs into your TV's HDMI port. If you have a compatible Sony TV, the TV's built-in sound system can be used as the center channel. But as the name implies, the Bravia Theater Quad system includes 4 wireless speakers. They still need to each be plugged into power. Those speakers have a dramatically new form factor, looking like flat gray squares rather than the fairly large white cylinders of the HT-A9 system. So
yeah, so the $2,500 is just the 4 speakers and the control box. There is a microphone that I think is like built into the remote control, but you do measure it, and this is doing the Sony 360 audio processing thing where you can sort of physically place these speakers as long as they're like in the quadrants of your room, right? In front of you to the left, in front of you to the right, behind you to the left, behind you to the right. As long as they're anywhere in that general vicinity, it will do the, processing thing through the microphone to try and make that imaging all work as it should if you had ideally placed the speakers. But if you want to add on a subwoofer, the subwoofer models that they had last year are carrying over, so you have to add those separately. So that $2,500 price tag very quickly gets up to $35,000, $4,000. It's not an inexpensive system whatsoever.
And since the news just can't stop talking about Sony this week, Sony Pictures is reportedly in talks to acquire Paramount, that they would be partnering up with Apollo Global Management, AGM, maybe, I don't know, to offer at least $26 billion to take on Paramount, CBS, and their debt. So I don't know why anybody would pay money to take on debt, but that's just me. Whatever.
Well, that's just part of the acquisition deal. So yet more news. This one seems like we have to consider it rumor at this point. There are actually other bidders that are attempting to buy Paramount. Paramount is very much trying to sell itself at this point. But this is coming across as quite a credible rumor, as in these talks are a little farther along than a lot of the other ones that were just sort of speculated upon. So the notion that another 2 gigantic Hollywood studios, Columbia Pictures, Sony Pictures, merging up with Paramount seems like something that might be taking place in the not too distant future. Sony, some of the news stories have been saying, like Sony is like the only major motion picture studio that doesn't have their own streaming service, which isn't entirely true, because they do have Sony Pictures Core, which is their high bandwidth streaming movie service, but it's only available on Sony TVs through their built-in operating system. You can't get it through any external boxes. So in that sense, it's certainly not as readily available as Paramount Plus. But yeah, the notion that once they get together, if and when they do, we'll see, everything merged together into a single streaming service, maybe. I mean, Michael Bay wants those IMAX enhanced high bitrate versions showing up in streaming. That's what it's all about, I'm
how
sure.
else are you going to see those Transformer
That's right.
balls?
Yep. That is what has stuck.
I don't know. And finally, getting away from Sony, TCL is now offering a 163-inch modular micro LED display that can hit 10,000 nits, but only in China.
That's right.
One of the main issues in bringing it to other regions is actually power consumption. Each module is fully capable of 10,000 nits full field, but this draws a massive amount of electricity when the full 163-inch display is put together. Nevertheless, TCL X11H Max. You shouldn't start by calling something Max. You know you're going to make a bigger one, so why would you call it Max?
Then you go to Ultra. That's what happens.
Is the first IMAX. lowercase I, and then you get sued. Is the first display of this size to hit the maximum nit level, and it's available to purchase in China if you can afford it. It's roughly $110,000 US price tag. Plus, it costs that much every year to run.
Pretty close.
So,
yeah.
Power.
Yeah. That's a lot of electricity to hit 10,000 nits on 163 inches, but it's just kind of cool. We now have a modular display of this size, 163 inches once you put it all together. That is 4K resolution at that size. That is going right up to the full maximum spec of what HDR10 and Dolby Vision can encompass in their signal levels. They top out at 10,000 nits, and they've done it. This is a 10,000 nit display, so no tone mapping necessary. This will show the signal exactly as the signal said to show it.
Yeah. I don't know. I wrote an article about why it's like no longer necessary to go to the movie theaters ever again, because everything that you can get at the movie theater you can get at home, but better.
Yep.
It used to be at least you could get the big picture there, but now we can get the big picture at home.
You could.
It used to be that the picture was better at home at the movie theater than it was at home, and now it's better at home.
That's right.
It used to be that you can get louder. We can definitely do that.
Deeper bass in the movie theater was the common thing for sure, but we can outperform that at home now. Yep.
Comments. Sasi, last week we had a question from Matthew in the UK who was disappointed after having recently replaced an 8-inch Yamaha sub with an SVS SB1000. It was clear that physical size and price were important considerations, and Rob suggested looking into what it might cost to get an RSL Speedwoofer 10S Mark II. If Matthew didn't have any luck getting more satisfying results from an SB1000 using our suggestions. Sasi lives in the US now, but he's in touch with friends in the UK. They were kind enough to look into it since Sasi was curious about it, and they discovered that for RSL and HSU, the shipping and import duty costs makes it prohibitively expensive.
Mm-hmm. This is not a shock. That is understandable. Yeah.
So a couple alternative suggestions that were readily available to order in the UK have been offered. First is the Tone Winner D2000. It's a bit bigger than the SB1000, which is basically a 13.5-inch cube, but it's about as compact as a 12-inch slot-ported subwoofer can be. Basically a 16.5-inch cube, which is way bigger. It's way bigger.
But still,
you think it's only 3 more, but it's a lot. Right. That's 3 more is a lot
in
more.
all 3 dimensions. Yes. But it still, visually at least looks like kind of compact, right? It's
right.
Like, it's all together there.
In the pictures, they look exactly the same.
Right. And it is a rear slot port going on with that, so it is not a sealed design for the Tone Winner D2000.
For its size, it can play loud and low. The only downside is that it definitely costs more at 750 pounds versus the 500 pounds or so that the SB1000 goes for.
Yeah.
So the second suggestion is to check out BK Electronics, which we've talked about in this podcast before. They hand build their subs in Great Britain, so it's a domestic product in Matthew's case. Their monolith subwoofer, soon to be sued out of existence, is...
Well, I mean, Monoprice doesn't have a gigantic, foothold in the UK, so they might get away with it.
If they decide to, though, there's going to be a problem. Their monolith subwoofer is available in either a front-firing or down-firing designs for 535 pounds. It's available in a variety of finish options and includes fully variable phase. It's ported and definitely bigger. It's very, very similar to the old PB12 NSD. Mm-hmm. But perhaps one of the nice finish options will make the much larger size acceptable, especially considering the price. Just some suggestions. Sasi really hopes Matthew is able to find a solution that fulfills his original expectations, and we hope so too.
Yes, yeah, so I appreciate that. We have talked about BK Electronics in the UK in the past, but that is many episodes ago at this point, and I forgot to mention them last week, so I very much appreciate the reminder myself. They are a great option when you're in the UK, because since they are constructed domestically, you aren't getting... I mean, a lot of the subwoofers that we talk about, the only way to get them elsewhere in the world is via importing them, and that adds a lot to the price. You don't get the same bang for buck value once you add a whole bunch of shipping and importing costs. So it is nice when you have a domestic alternative like this that makes the value proposition much higher. And yeah, by all means, it's certainly very, very close to like a PB1000 or a PB12 NSD. The design is very similar too, with that offset port design that they did there in the 12-inch driver and the big old box size, because the PB1000, not a physically small sub, but some nice finish options. They aren't charging an arm and leg for it, so I very much like that suggestion.
All right, let's get to the questions here. Brad has a dedicated listening room that's fully acoustically treated, so he's already familiar with the benefits and where to place panels in general, and he would expect to acoustically treat any viewing or listening room as much as practicality allows. But
ellipsis.
But I'm not gonna, because I can't, and I need to make it sound good anyways. How do you do it?
It's a little different question than that.
All right, we'll see.
Yeah.
But for one of the rooms in his basement, he's using a Samsung Q990C soundbar. They listed as 11.1.4 channels Atmos soundbar. They could list it for 1 million channels. It doesn't make any difference. It's all BS anyways. And the bar at the front of the room, as well as the pair of satellite speakers at the back of the room, all have upward firing and side firing drivers that supposedly bounce their sound off the ceiling and side walls. Sure they do.
Right.
Sure they do.
Well, that's a lot of what he's asking about.
So he's concerned that if he acoustically treats the room in the normal way, including panels placed at the first reflection points, that would negatively impact the soundbar system's performance. Let's be honest. How much more negative can it get? He hasn't been able to find any objective testing in this exact scenario. So what do we say? What's his best approach to acoustic treatment in a setup that supposedly relies on sounds reflecting off the ceilings and sidewalls? Okay, so I wrote that article about how upward firing Atmos modules work. I'll link it up here. And yes, there is some science behind how these bouncing of things are supposed to work. Okay. And that's why you have some people are like, it doesn't work at all. And some people say it works great. It works nearly as good, if not as good as an actual speaker being up there. And there is something to be said for it. There is no world in which I think they actually expect the side bouncing crap to do anything.
I mean, even in their own promo picture, they're missing a wall on the right-hand side.
there's no world in which this thing is actually designed with you having specific placement. This is just to add, I don't know, ambiance. I don't know, diffusion. I would not worry about it at all.
Like the Bose speakers with drivers firing off at different angles to give you a more diffuse sound in your room. There's a little bit of that going on. I mean, so how much sound is actually being reflected? So I mean, look, there have been systems, and I mean, key among them is Yamaha's digital sound projection system, where they really were doing beam forming. So they had a gazillion little tiny drivers in those Yamaha sound projectors. And I'm talking the original ones, not the ones that they eventually slimmed down because people just didn't like the necessarily large form factor of the sound projectors that actually worked the way that they claimed when they first invented it. But those had a bunch of little drivers that would fire in a very specifically calculated sequence to be able to like beam the sound in directions, and those really were bouncing some sound off of walls. Not so much the ceiling at the time because they weren't around. They were around before Atmos was invented, but they really were bouncing some sound off of sidewalls and back walls, and they very much weren't able to sound the way that they were intended to if you lacked a wall on one side of your room. It was really quite apparent and noticeable with those sound projectors.
I've tested those before. I tested one of those in the room that I was in at the time. It was my system was in the corner. Sure. And it did not the angle of the angles of the walls,
45-degree angles on the side walls. Yep.
It would not work. It just did not work at all. And with each one of those, you had the option of doing the digital sound projection, which is what they kind of called that, or the DSP one. Yeah,
well, there was also kind of a focus mode, which was like, here is the one and only seat I care about, and it would then beam form to that one seat. It could even do a thing that was pretty effective, those old Yamaha sound projectors, which was they always marketed it as your in bed next to your partner who is sleeping next to you, and you want to direct all the sound just to you who's sitting up in bed still listening to TV. And it's not that the person next to you would hear silence. It wasn't to that degree, but it was pretty effective at making it considerably louder at your one location than the seat right next to you. So all of that is prefaced to say that the very concept of reflecting sound, purposefully reflecting sound off of walls or off of a ceiling, that is not like out of the realm of possibility. It's not that sounds can never be reflected off of surfaces in your room. But the extent to which that is actually taking place with systems like this Samsung soundbar, so they've got, some small drivers, and these are like not actually tweeters, they're like 2-inch quote unquote full range drivers, that are firing off at angles and then firing straight off to the sides, and then some that are upward firing for the Atmos purposes. The extent to which that sound is actually reaching your ears exclusively via reflection off of a sidewall or ceiling surface, that is very dubious in our experience. What is going on, as far as we can tell, is that, part of Dolby Atmos's virtualization technology, and you can get, Dolby Atmos height virtualization in many modern AV receivers, where you just have 5.1 or 7.1 normal setup, no speakers overhead, no upward firing speakers either, and just with forward facing drivers, they apply some digital signal processing, apply a generic head related transfer function to fool your ears into thinking that sounds were coming from locations above you or locations behind you or locations to the side of you, when all of that sound was actually coming from forward facing drivers in front of you. That processing is predominantly what is responsible for any sense of additional envelopment coming from these soundbar systems. So even though there are drivers physically facing in different directions, if you're getting the sense that there's sound from beside you, behind you, above you, it's mostly from that digital signal processing. It's mostly from applying a head-related transfer function, some phase manipulation, though frequency response manipulation as well, to fool your brain into thinking that sounds were coming from different locations, but it's not really reflected sound that's causing that thing. They're not beam forming with these drivers. They don't have that type of control like the old Yamaha sound projectors did. No. Yeah. All of that said, if you were to traditionally and fairly heavily acoustically treat your room, so absorption panels right at the first reflection points, corner bass traps, and 20 to 30% of the total surface area of your room fully treated, these systems will sound kind of contained. Like there'll be a little bit less of that sense of more spaciousness, more envelopment. Some of that does go away when you rather heavily treat your room and at those specific reflection points, because it's not as though there aren't first reflections. Like those exist in non-soundbar systems, and they exist in this soundbar system too. So if you're absorbing those, you are going to eliminate some of that spaciousness sense, some of that natural room reverberation. So normally my recommendation in soundbar systems like this, if what you're wanting is that greater sense of spaciousness, that greater sense of envelopment, it's not that I wouldn't treat the room whatsoever, but I would go back to what is our good advice, regardless of the situation. Focus on bass trapping first. That's the thing that I would really want to do in this room, and less so, quite a bit less so, first reflection points, right? Which is often the first thing that people do, maybe just because of the name, but rather than focusing on putting panels at first reflection points on your ceiling and side walls, and to some extent even the back wall, focus on the bass trapping in this room. Just get the overall decay times better under control. Get about 10% of your total surface area of this room covered in bass trapping, and I might just stop there. With a system like this, I probably wouldn't bother treating the first reflection points. I might treat the front wall. I might avoid treating the back wall as long as my seat is a good distance away from that back wall. If my seat's very close to the back wall, then I'm still going to want to treat directly behind my head, because dialogue intelligibility always matters more than spaciousness and envelopment. But if you have a good distance from the back of your seat to the back wall, I might even avoid treating the back wall in this scenario. So it is a little bit of a different recommendation for me on how to do it, but bass trapping, we're still going to do that. Still about 10% of the total surface area covered in bass traps.
I think a lot of the times in rooms like this, you're not worrying about having too much acoustic treatments is never really an issue, because there's only so much that you can really do realistically in here. So
sure. But it's just sometimes the first and only thing people do is treat the first reflection points. Yeah, and I'm like, that wouldn't be my recommendation in this scenario.
Yeah. My first recommendation would be treat behind your head.
Yeah.
Start there. Jay's theater room is 13 by 23 by 7.9 well, I guess 7 feet 7 inches high.
That's right.
It's fully enclosed, and he did a full renovation, so the room has been decoupled to make it as soundproof as possible. He's the fellow who permanently installed the seating riser for his back row, and now he finds himself wishing he could move it a few inches, but he's making do. He's got golden ear Triton reference towers up front. The bass drivers in those towers are self-powered, and there's an option to run an RCA subwoofer cable to each tower and feed them the bass managed subwoofer pre-out signal from his AV receiver. He's also got the matching golden ear reference center, and then 2 pairs of golden ear side surrounds, a pair for each row of seats, and surround backs, all in-wall speakers, and 4 golden ear in-ceiling speakers with their built-in angled drivers for the overheads. Golden ear had a closeout sale, and he just scooped them all up. His receiver is a Marantz Cinema 50. He uses its built-in amps to power the 4 overhead speakers, and the 7 floor-level speakers, 9 channels in all, are powered by an Outlaw audio amplifier. Until this past week, he just had one SVS PB3000 sub positioned in the rear left corner of his room. He's been saving up for a second sub, and when he found a good deal on Facebook Marketplace for another PB3000, he pounced. Now, so his first order of business is figuring out where to place his pair of PB3000 subs. He has no plans to move any speakers or seats at this point. One consideration is that the self-powered bass drivers in the towers can genuinely play quite low. For the love of God, please. Stop, please. You're killing me. There are 3 oblong bass drivers, 6 inches wide, 10 inches tall, racetrack woofers, they call them, on the front of each tower, and then a pair of passive radiators on each side panel, 4 passive radiators per tower, and there's a claimed 1,800 watts of amplification built into each tower. Golden Ear specs claim extension down to 12 hertz. I can extend down to 12 hertz. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to hear it. You could probably clap
your hands at 12 hertz.
I probably could.
Yeah.
Real-world measurements peg the minus 3 dB point at 24 or 25 hertz. They might not fully match the 20 hertz extension of the PB. Is there a sticker on this thing? PB. There is. Jesus. Brand new shirts. PB 3000 subs, but they're pretty darn capable. Let's just leave that there. That him thinking it might be cool to put the 2 PB 3000 subs in the 2 rear corners of the room and then use all 4 Marantz Cinemas 50s independent subwoofer pre-outs. But the right rear corner has an equipment rack, and since the room is a little bit narrow, he doesn't really want to position either of the 3000s subs too far from either the front or back walls. They would quickly start to impede the walkways. If we were to put one of the PB 3000 subs on its side, so it's not too tall, he could go below his screen on the front wall, just to the inside of his front right tower. Then he could keep his other PB 3000s on the back wall, and just scooch it in from the rear left wall so it's perfectly diagonal across the room. To confirm, it's okay to put a PB 3000 sub on its side, right? Yes, it is.
It is absolutely fine to put a PB 3000 sub on its side.
If you have carpet, I would not even worry about the rest of it. Let me worry about having feet.
Isolation feet or an isolation riser, probably. Yeah. I mean, as long as you got a pretty good, nice, thick carpet pad under there, that's going to be pretty well damped from the physical structure of your building below. Yep.
So then you'd have diagonally opposite placement for the 2 PB 3000 subs, but the front towers would still be essentially in the 2 front corners. Would that mean he shouldn't send the signal of the Marantz subwoofer pre-outs to the RC inputs on those towers? How is he positioned to hook up all of this for the best results? You never should have had the RCA hookups going to your towers. I think I wrote another article about this because it keeps coming up. But I think it's entitled something, and I don't think it's published yet, but it's like the simple reason why you should always set your speakers to small, and that includes your speakers. And the reason is, and we say it thousands of times on this podcast, there's a place so that your surround sound sounds good that you put your speakers. You put them in those places so the surround sound sounds good. Yeah. Okay? And then there's a place or places where you put your subwoofers so the bass sounds good. Those places rarely, and I think honestly say, never overlap. Okay? Those are never the right places. So let's put it this way. Let's pretend, and this is not true in this case. Okay. Let's pretend that your tower speakers have just as much bass capability in your room as your subwoofers. Okay. Let's pretend that that's the case. Okay. So you're in a small room. Your subwoofers, your tower speakers have built-in subs that genuinely play down to, let's say, 20 hertz, okay, and can pressurize your space. None of that is true with your current towers.
But
let's pretend it is, okay? If you said, I've got 2 subwoofers, where should I place them? Look at where your 2 tower speakers are placed, and then place them across the room and the same amount away from the walls and all of the walls as your tower speakers, which would probably be somewhere in the middle of your back row of seats. So where a seat is, it is not going to be in the same.
But I mean,
location.
he was thinking that because in his case, his 2 front towers are pretty close to the front corners of his room, and he was like, okay, maybe I put the 2 PB3000s in the 2 rear corners of my room, but can't do that because there is an equipment rack in the rear right corner, and there are walkways that'll start getting impeded if I do that. So, I mean, Tom and I are going to agree the second option that you talked about. So a PB3000 put over on its side so that it isn't so tall that it's impeding onto the bottom edge of your projection screen up at the front of your room, towards the front right-hand side, so on the front wall, and then, yes, on the inside of your tower speaker there. He was a little concerned. He's like, those sideways passive radiators, they're still going to be in use, so is it going to be too close to the sub? Is it going to be like bouncing us out? No problem. Those frequencies are going to wrap right around that subwoofer, no problem. It is certainly not as though with the towed-in angle that you've got on your front towers that it's like literally going to be the passive radiator flush to the physical side of the subwoofer. There's going to be enough airspace there for movement, no problem. And then, diagonally across the room, so on the back wall towards the left-hand side of the room, but scooched in from the left wall, the same amount that the sub at the front of the room is scooched in from the right wall. So that is certainly the placement we will go for. And the hookup is going to be, we're actually going to have you say, hey, Cinema 50 of mine, I have 1 subwoofer.
1 subwoofer.
You went from, maybe I have 4, and we're like, nope, I have 1.
You got 1.
You got 1. Now, you are either going to use a Y splitter, or on those PB3000s, you could daisy chain them if you wanted to.
I thought you could set the Cinema 50 to output mono. You can't do that with that one?
No, it still doesn't do that. When you do the Odyssey setup, if you tell it has 2 subwoofers, it's going to assign them independent distances and trim levels. And we don't really want them to do that. We want the mono signal going out to the 2 subwoofers. So it is a pretty simplified setup. You are going to need, 2 RCA cables and either a Y splitter or a daisy chain type of setup. But that's going to be the way that you feed the bass in this system. One of the little bit of explanations that I wanted to give on why, aside from just extension and output capabilities of the self-powered bass drivers that are built into the towers, not using those as like RCA subwoofer pre-out signal fed, drive units in your room, aside from them just not matching the extension and output of the PB3000s, there's also the fact that those bass drivers are playing all the way up to like 300 hertz.
Right.
And so what we really need to focus on, because you are still going to plug them into power. It's not that you're going to unplug those towers from the wall. And you are still going to need to adjust the volume dial on each of those tower speakers, but we're not adjusting them as a subwoofer. It's not a subwoofer volume dial in those tower speakers. What you are adjusting that volume for is you play a sweep that goes down to at least 80 hertz through the front left tower alone.
Honestly,
and through the front right tower alone.
I've got no problem with DefTech speakers, Golden Ear speakers or DefTech speakers. So I think that DefTech does it as well. Anything that has powered subwoofers in it.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that they have, there's no way to level match them really easily.
Well, that's just, you have to do trial and error. I mean, you can do it either just by ear or by measuring, but it is still trial and error either way. And so, what I'm getting at there is you're going to play that nice sweep through just one speaker at a time, and you're adjusting the volume so that that sweep through that one speaker, still set to small, still bass managed, still has a crossover being applied at 80 hertz, or maybe it's, 70 or 90 or something around there, but 80 hertz normally is the starting point that we're going with. And you're going to need to adjust that volume so that the bass that those bass drivers are playing all the way up to 300, 350 hertz blends properly. And it's not incorrect that you have that adjustment capability, because it's going to change depending on placement in your room. It's going to change depending on room size and how close those speakers are to the boundaries, to the walls of your room. So having that adjustment capability, I'm really not against. It's just that the only way to set it is trial and error, and you're not setting it for its performance as a subwoofer. You're just setting it for its performance as a bass driver, a regular bass driver in your speakers. And so that's why I don't want to go messing around with, now I want to adjust it for the subwoofer performance being fed the pre-out signal,
Yes.
the subwoofer pre-out signal, because now that could be easily in conflict, where the way to get the volume level for the subwoofer signal needs to be something other than what delivers a nice, even response when you're playing a sweep just through the speaker acting as a speaker and not as a subwoofer. So utilize what's there to get really good speaker performance. Leave all of the subwoofer pre-out signal to your pair of PB3000s.
Yes. My trackpad stopped working in the middle of this podcast, and that's why I had to run off and go get a mouse.
Get a mouse.
So when he just had a single PB3000, instead of all of his speakers, including his front left and right towers, to small, but they connected sub out 1 and sub out 2 to his front towers and sub out 3 to his PB3000 in the rear left corner.
Yeah.
He read through Rob's 12-step guide. I keep trying to use a trackpad. Now that he has a pair of PB3000 subs, but that guide doesn't really cover this exact scenario, so how should everything be configured? Rob kind of went through that already.
Yeah, actually, yeah. That would just be a repeat of what I just said. So you are down to a thing that'll work exactly with my 12-step guide to setting up dual subwoofers, because we're right back there again.
I'm going to have to write up an article about this. It's really... See, the thing that's really annoying is that the subwoofer section isn't just a subwoofer section.
It's a bass driver section.
It's a bass driver section. So if they were going to legitimately make these speakers the way that they should make the speaker so that it plays down to past 80 hertz and then crosses over into the subwoofer section. So you could just unplug it and say, that's it. This is what. But instead, they're like, oh, well, we've got all this extra power down here. We've got an amp built in. We can make this. We can have it play higher, and then we get higher efficiency out of the rest of it because amplifier power that goes into the top section doesn't have to be as much because it's not playing as much bass.
That's right. And to be fair, they are very high output, high efficiency speakers. So it's not like there's no justifiable benefit to having done a powered bass driver section and a speaker.
But it just makes it impossible for you to really. Because the output of the subwoofers maybe isn't as the amount of power and stuff that you need, the volume level that you would set for the subwoofer part of it isn't necessarily the same as what you would set for the bass part of it.
That's right.
And you end up in this conflict where you're like, well, if I set it high enough for my subwoofers, then suddenly that lower bass around 300 down to 80 hertz is way too loud.
That's right.
Or if I said it for that, then the subwoofer section is way too soft. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
And yes, to some extension, trim level settings in the AV receiver and EQ being applied to individual channels, including the subwoofer signal is separate from the front left signal. Yes, there are ways around it, but it's like, why complicate things to that degree when we can get excellent performance by treating the speakers as speakers and treating the subwoofers as subwoofers?
As subwoofers, that's right. And not only that, I mean, if you look at the way RBH has done this in the past, they'll have modules sometimes that are actually separate. Like you stack on top of each other, and there'll be a subwoofer on the bottom, and then a speaker section, and then a subwoofer on the top. Sort of thing, which is great for me. Fine, then you can basically get rid of the two subwoofers, but that's just me. But at least then you know that the speaker section is just the speaker.
That's right.
And you don't have to worry about it. Infinite Gary. Dang, stupid trackpad. Let's say that price is not a major factor. If Tom and Rob could pick our favorite seating distance, what would that be, and what screen size would we end up with as a result? On the flip side, if we were just picking our favorite display, what would that be, and what seating distance would we end up with as a result? The biggest OLED available.
Okay, so that's 97 inches. And I mean, if price is not a factor, then that's what.
And I probably want to set about 42, so I have a 42 degree field of view.
Oh,
maybe 40. I could go up to 45 or 40, a little bit higher. I really like, so if the screen is a little bit lower, I don't mind having the bigger field of view. But as the screen inches its way up because of how big it is, I like it to be a little bit smaller.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of the way I would go.
Okay,
that's a price is no fat.
That'd be a 97-inch OLED in Tom's case, and that'd be about 9.5 feet, 9 feet 4 inches or so would be the seating distance. And you end up with the same thing either way. Is that right? Or do you have a preferred seating distance? And if a display existed that would give you the correct field of view, do you have a preferred seating distance?
I don't think so. I don't think I do. I understand that there's like this focal length thing that having a screen a certain distance from you is less tiring for your eyes or whatever. I've been living with a screen very close to me this entire time. I've never once gotten out of my home theater, even after a very long watching session of whatever I was doing and thought, oh, my eyes are tired. Never thought of that. So I don't think I'm going to think it. So I don't really care.
Okay. My answer to start with, and I'm going to do the second part first. So like a favorite display, same answer. I'm getting, if price isn't too much of a factor, a 97-inch OLED. And I'm going to go ahead and get that. And for my preference, because I really like almost a bang-on 45-degree field of view. I know that is my personal preference, which means I'm going to be sitting, about 8 feet 7 inches from a 97-inch screen to give me that field of view. So that answers that on that size. Now, if I had basically limitless money, like a truly money is not a factor, that means I can also have the room to accommodate this and the electricity bill to accommodate this. I do have a preferred seating distance, which is honestly, if I had my 100% my druthers and cost is no object whatsoever, I'm going to sit 15 feet from eyes to screen. That gets my eyes physiologically into that infinite focus where there's no longer any like physiological eye lens movement in my human eye anymore beyond 15 feet. So I'm going to have that 15-foot eyes to screen viewing distance if I really could go for it. Now that means if I want to maintain my 45-degree field of view, well, right about 160-inch screen is perfect. And we just talked about TCL has a brand new 163-inch modular micro LED display that can go all the way up to 10,000 nits with perfect black levels as well. Costs $110,000 and costs about the same per year to run the electricity to get that thing up to 10,000 nits. But hey, money was no object in this hypothetical question, and that all works out really swimmingly. So there you go. That's what I'd do, Gary.
All right. I'd be okay with that too. I don't really care.
Right.
Mike has been working away on his latest home theater, and he's getting close to installing all of the gear and tackling calibration. He's got 4 SVS PB2000 subs, 1 in each corner of an enclosed room. He's got a mini DSP 2x4 HD with an NAU Mic 1. He's got Room EQ Wizard and the multi-sub optimizer software downloaded and ready to roll. Okay. I'm going to say that. I think maybe you didn't have to get some of this stuff and now have to roll anything, but that's just me. His AV receiver has Odyssey Multi-Q XC32. He isn't looking for a literal step-by-step calibration tutorial. We like our take on the order of operations here. What gets measured and adjusted first? Should he only worry about using the multi-sub optimizer software on the 4 subwoofers, or should he be using the subwoofers capabilities to integrate his subs with the main left and right speakers for an ideal crossover? And if he's doing the crossover for the front, left, and right speakers, what about the center? What about the surrounds? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, placing them properly is like almost all of it.
Which he is getting to do. He's got an enclosed rectangle of a room. He's got 4 subwoofers, 1 in each corner of the room.
Yes. At that point, I usually tell people, don't worry about any of the rest of it. Don't worry about the multi-sub optimizer. Multi-sub optimizer is really for non-rectangular rooms and uneven number of subs not placed properly. Because of
or
whatever
any of those things. Non-ideally placed subwoofers, preferably 3 or 4. It does work with as few as 2, but it does its best work when you have 3 or 4. But it is for irregularly shaped rooms, non-enclosed rooms, non-ideally positioned subwoofers. That's where it's providing the greatest benefit. So if I'm doing order of operations, and you already own all of these things and you have them on hand ready to go, I would recommend what we start with is you have now positioned, you've completed the room, you've closed the door, you've positioned the 4 subwoofers. Whether you do this through the mini DSP 2x4 HD just for the cleanliness of how the wires will run, or you literally just daisy chain the 4 subwoofers together so that you're feeding a single mono signal to all 4 subwoofers identical, and you set all 4 subwoofers identical. You don't touch their phase knobs. You have their volume knobs all set to the same place as a starting point. I'm going to start there. I'm going to go ahead and honestly, I would just use my ears and play a bass sweep because I'm not going to worry about it too much. But you already have a U-Mic 1. You already have Room EQ Wizard. You could measure instead of only relying on your ears.
The problem with that
is
that ROM is not that line's not going to be perfectly straight.
It is not going to be perfect. Yeah, but what we're looking for is if I'm doing it by ear, I'm sitting in each of my seats. So like a 3-seater couch is all I'm really going to critically care about. But look, if you got 2 rows of seats and you really want to listen in, 6 seats, you got 2 rows of three seats each or something like that. You're going to listen in every single seat, bass sweep playing on repeat, and you are not going to worry if you do not hear completely even volume throughout that entire sweep. But very handily, you can play that sweep. That sweep can be generated and playing on repeat for you by Room EQ Wizard. It's great because then you can have a on-screen display of exactly what frequency is playing at every given moment. It'll show you that on screen what frequency is playing as the sweep is playing on repeat.
Yes, and that's convenient for sure.
That's very convenient. And what you are trying to find is uniformity, not linearity at this point, not perfect bass response. We haven't done any equalization or created a target curve or anything like that. But what we are hoping to have is pretty darn good uniformity from seat to seat to seat. There's going to be some ups and downs in the volume, but it's the same ups and downs at the same frequencies in all of the seats. And odds are that has already been achieved without you having done anything else to any software or any settings on your subwoofers or anything like that, just by virtue of having an enclosed rectangle of a room and 4 ideally positioned subwoofers in that space. You will have, in all likelihood, achieved very good uniformity from seat to seat to seat. That means you don't need the multi-sub optimizer software, because the point of the multi-sub optimizer software is not to get you perfect linearity. It's not to get you to your target curve that you're trying to hit after the final equalization. It's to get you the uniformity from seat to seat to seat. And I love that there are basically 3 options in multi-sub optimizer now of what you're basically telling it, what am I trying to do here? What's the goal? You're going to be doing these measurements, but what are you trying to do? And the third option is the best uniformity. Don't worry about linearity. Don't worry about hitting a target curve. Just get me the best uniformity. And I love that that's the option, and that's the option you would go for. So let's say you're not convinced by your ears, even though your ears are telling you it's very uniform from seat to seat. You do use your U-Mic 1 and Room EQ Wizard, and you measure in each seat. You measure that bass sweep as it's playing. All 4 subs in mono, playing the exact same signal together, but you measure in each seat, and you look at the graphs of your 6 seats all there, and you're like, the lines are not literally superimposed over each other. There's tiny little plus minus 2 dB
1
variances.
dB variations. Oh my God, how will I survive?
And I already downloaded multi-sub optimizer software, and I already bought a mini DSP 2x4 HD, and I'm determined to use them. And at that point, you could go ahead and do that. You could go ahead and do that to get you the very best uniformity from seat to seat to seat that you can possibly do. You're going to use that third option in the multi-sub optimizer software to do it. You're going to follow the instructions that are provided on the multi-sub optimizer website, because you're actually going to start by taking the measurements in Room EQ Wizard with U-Mic 1, and then you're going to import those measurements in the multi-sub optimizer. That's going to get you the correction file, which gets uploaded to your mini DSP 2x4 HD. So that's the order of operations. And now we have laid our foundation. We now have a wonderful base foundation on which to build the rest of our system that is supplying uniform bass from seat to seat to seat. At that point, all you do is run Odyssey Multi-Q XD32, and we are not necessarily going to trust that it set the crossover frequencies for each of your speakers perfectly.
That's right.
So if I would listen, I would go beyond what Tom would do, because Tom would just say, okay, it set some of my speakers to large, nuts to that, everything gets to small. And I agree, that's step number 1. Anything that got set to large is set to small. And Tom would say, I'm going to set it to a global 80 hertz crossover and I'm done.
Oh, that's not true. I say anything set lower than 80 gets to 80. Anything set higher than 80 stays where it's at.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
That's what I say.
But I would go to the extent of being pretty ridiculous and playing now a full frequency sweep through each channel individually, or at least the floor level channels. I really don't care about the overheads, but a full frequency sweep through each floor level channel individually. And I'm just to confirm for my own edification that sweep sounds pretty darn nice and even and uniform from top to bottom in all of my seats. If it doesn't, or if you measure, because you can measure again at this point, and you're like, once again, the lines do not perfectly superimpose for every single channel at every single seat, which is a lot of measurements, by the way, because that's a lot of speakers and multiple seats, and you're measuring all of them if you're going to do it. But that's where I'm not going to worry too much about trying to use multi-sub optimizer software to measure the speakers, and which would require like a mini DSP 2x4 for every pair of speakers that you have in your room. There's a lot of mini DSP 2x4 HDs and a lot of running MSO. What I'm going to do instead is, in all likelihood, just raise the crossover frequency, or potentially add a little bit or subtract a little bit of delay to the one subwoofer signal that is going from the AV receiver to the mini DSP 2x4 at that point. And just that way, I'm adjusting the relative phase of the quad subwoofer system relative to the speaker, or I'm just raising the crossover a little bit because we already achieved really good uniformity in our bass. So if I raise the crossover frequency, it ameliorates any seat-to-seat variation that's happening like 80, 90 hertz. Now my very uniform subs are doing everything up to 120 hertz, say, and that all works out very swimmingly. So that's the order of operations, and that is everything. That's how I would handle bass management.
So Mike bought the Earfun Wave Pro headphones that I reviewed for AV Gadgets, and he's very happy with them. Have I ever charged mine yet? And the answer is, I have not.
That's amazing. Not that you've been using them every single day since you stopped.
Not every single day, but multiple times a week for, in each session, at least an hour and sometimes many hours. So Sundays is when I do most of my writing for AV Gadgets. And I'll put the headphones on and I will write 4 or 5 hours. Mm-hmm. And I will wear them for most of that 4 or 5 hours. Usually it was just one ear cup on so I can listen to my wife say whatever she's going to say to me while I've got the ear. Because the minute I put the earphone on, she'll start talking to me. And then I'll take it off and be like, oh, what did you say? And then she'll say something. And then she won't talk to me again until I put it back on. So, yes, multiple hours. Usually Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, I wear them for a couple hours as I work in the morning, I write in the mornings on those mornings. And then during the week, if I'm doing any cooking or there's nobody home or there is, I'm doing chores or whatever, I'll wear them for a bit. Okay. So that could be anywhere from 20 minutes to whatever. They are down to, what did I send you a picture of?
29% is what I think I saw on that picture.
Okay.
It might have been 27, but
I think
we're
it's
down
20.
below 30 anyway. That's
yes. And they have been dropping a little bit faster, I think. But who knows if that's just because they've literally, it's been, what, months now?
It has. And we were both wrong. It was 28 on the image you sent me. 28%.
Okay, so it was down at 27 when I turned them off.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that was like an hour after I sent you a text.
Yes. So my theory that once it got down below 90, it would just drop like a rock. Nope, has not happened.
Has not. So I have not charged him yet.
Okay.
So anyways, he's got a guitar amp that can accept an incoming Bluetooth signal, but he was hoping to output a Bluetooth signal from the guitar amp and then listen to that on the Earfun headphones. The guitar amp does not seem to have a Bluetooth output built in. So is there any way to accomplish this? So yes, just because something can accept a Bluetooth signal does not mean that it will have a transmitter.
That's right. It's a receiver, but not a transmitter. No.
The one thing I would be worried about with sending, so you're going to be playing the guitar, and then it's going to go into the amp, and then you want it to come out of the amp via Bluetooth to your ears.
Right.
The one thing, the delay is going to be. Is going to be very disconcerting. So, it will be existent. It's not going to be. There is no way it's not going to be at least a little.
Now,
existent.
do those Earfun Wave Pros have aptX low latency?
I don't remember.
I don't think they did.
I don't think they did.
Yeah.
I think because if they did, then that would reduce the battery life.
Right. Yeah, I don't think they did. So if this were to work, and this is a big, big if, this is a IFF, if and only if, first of all, your guitar amplifier has like a headphone jack. Because, I mean, many guitar amplifiers, certainly practice guitar amplifiers, typically do have a headphone jack. And usually once you plug something into that headphone jack, it silences the guitar amplifier itself, and now the sound from your guitar is just coming through the headphones. That's pretty common. So if that's the scenario we're in, you could take that headphone jack, which is almost certainly a 1/4 inch jack, get a 1/4 inch to 3.5 millimeter adapter cable, and you could plug it into a Bluetooth transmitter. The one I would recommend is AVRant's Oasis Plus. It goes for $70 on Amazon. It's not the cheapest one out there, but I have found it to be a very reliable one, and critically, it does have aptX low latency. And does a really good job with that. So if this were to potentially work, that's the transmitter I would use, but that is predicated on the Bluetooth headphones you're using also having aptX low latency, because otherwise, yeah, it's going to be weird when you strum your guitar and it's a noticeable number of milliseconds later before you hear it in your headphones. That's a weird experience to go through. I would probably just get some wired headphones to use with your guitar amp. That's what I would do.
So the ones he's talking about, did I review these?
Yeah, the Wave Pros. Those are the ones.
Airfun Wave Pros was reviewed by Andrew, and those are different headphones than the ones that we're talking about.
Oh, okay.
Those do have LDAC.
That's
but
not the same thing.
I don't think they have. I'm looking at what it's got here. I don't think they have the low latency mode.
Right.
So they do have the high bit rate mode.
HD, sure.
Yeah.
But that's not the same as
That's
low
not the same
latency.
thing as a low latency, and you really need the low latency in this case. So yes,
like I
did not. Those are not the same headphones. The ones I've got last way longer than those.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, for Mike, if you like want to get that AVRant Oasis Plus from Amazon and return it if this doesn't work for you, like that's the Bluetooth transmitter I would give a try. As long as you have a 1/4 inch to 3.5 millimeter adapter cable, you can plug the headphone jack of your guitar amp into the 3.5 millimeter input on that AVRant Bluetooth transmitter. That gives you the best shot of this working, but I would not be surprised at all if the delay in that Bluetooth signal is just too much to bear when you're doing guitar practice.
What was the name of that? It's not called Soundcore. That's not the Soundcore ones. What were they called? The ones that we were talking about. Anyway, I'll find them in a second.
Okay.
Karl, recently on some other home theater podcasts, you traitor, and YouTube channels, Double Trader.
That's right.
Have posted episodes along with titles along the lines of "Is home theater dying in 2024?" I wrote something like that in 2021. So
that's
shut
right.
up.
There was a headline kind of similar to that on AV Gadgets at one point.
Yeah. He heard DJ's annoyance at those titles since he indicated that he felt they were not that they were clickbait, especially since they all seem to go on to explain why they do not think home theater is dying at all. But what are Tom and Rob's thoughts? Do we dislike these sorts of episode titles as much as DJ? And on the topic itself, do we think home theater is dying? So anything it is a clickbait title. Yeah. I wrote it because it was a clickbait title.
Yep.
Is home theater dying? I mean, in 2020, and you can make this argument, home theater had a huge uptick because people were dying to have better sound at home and better pictures at home.
Yeah,
too.
People were staying at home a lot more in 2020.
I don't remember why. Maybe it was just a weird thing. I don't know.
It was like not just in one area of the world. It was a pretty global phenomenon.
Pretty global. But now we're on the other side of that, and people are...
it's not the same growth rate as it was in this like massive boom of purchasing that went on during the pandemic, right? Yeah.
And there's, so people look at that.
If all you do is look at a trend line of revenue year over year, then you're like, oh, it's leveling off or even going downward. It must be dying economically. Sure, yeah.
And that's what's happening in the bicycle industry as well.
Sure.
Bicycle industry you could not get parts in 2020.
Right. Exercise equipment too, that happened. Personal computers.
And now it's like they're giving away bikes on Facebook Marketplace. Like literally, just come take it. I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get rid of stuff. And or at least it's easy to get stuff because it's so cheap. So is home theater dying? I mean, I can make the argument and have made it very recently in an article that I have not yet published that there's no reason to go to the movie theaters anymore.
Right.
If you ask me, do I think the movie theaters are dying? The answer is yes, I absolutely do. I mean, I don't think they will completely die.
Not completely, no.
I think they'll always be around, and maybe not always, but they are going to be around for a very long time because the studio industry will not let them go.
Sure.
And there will always be people whose system at home does not rival what is at the movie theaters.
And you get that communal experience, that audience experience that you can't.
And that is the one reason that I think that movie theaters still have benefit. When you go and see them, like what Rob was talking about a couple of weeks ago, that that first night.
Yeah.
I've been to like the first showing of like the Matthew Broderick Godzilla. We went at midnight showing.
Yeah.
The night, like Thursday night, because it was debuting on Friday or whatever it was, and went and saw it, and it was I mean that is an experience that you will not have. The first Mortal Kombat movie, I went, and when the first time I said, "Get over here," everybody lost their freaking minds.
Mean, that crowd is actually there to watch the movie, not to be on their phones. And that's a fun experience. Yes.
But you look at that Avengers Endgame when Captain America gets gets Thor's hammer, and the crowd loses their minds.
That's right.
Right? And you're like, man, what a great experience. Just remember, some a-hole was in that theater recording that.
Sure.
On their phone while it was happening.
That's right.
Okay, so maybe the people around them weren't like, oh, I'm so glad I'm here. They were looking at this person going, you son of a
Screen
you know
on
what.
Full brightness, no doubt.
Sure. So the technology has gotten to the point, like Rob said last week, where the movie theaters are now trying to catch up with what you can get at home, and they're failing. They just are. Like, even I think I was reading an article that was like talking about how bad projection screens are, and the images are at most movie theaters because they don't know what they're doing anymore, and it's been kind of relegated to just employees instead of projectionists who actually knew how to calibrate things and stuff, because it's all digital, and they think that they don't need qualified people to do it. And he's like, oh yeah, and I went to this high-end best of the best movie theater, blah blah blah, that was showing a Top Gun Maverick in in this amazing picture, and my eyes could really tell the difference. And the person who took this person who wrote the article there was like, yeah, we're getting 32-foot Lamberts in here. I was like, man, I could really see how much better that was. I was like, 32-foot Lamberts stuck in the calculator.
That's 100 nits.
109 technically.
Okay. Yeah.
109 nits. I'm not saying that's not a good number for a projection. It is, especially in a theater.
For a cinema, that is HDR, or what they're often referring to now as EDR, enhanced dynamic range, rather than high dynamic range.
You don't even have to buy a good TV to get like 400 nits at home. I mean,
that's a Dolby Cinema. Dolby Cinema's 110, 120 nits.
It's crazy to think that. So do I think home theater is dying? No, I do not. Do I think that home theater will ever be adopted the way that the niche people like us think it should be adopted? Absolutely not. I never think it will. If that's dying, then yes, it's dying, I guess.
So on the clickbait front, I mean, yes, I do think it's clickbait. Yes, I do roll my eyes at it, but it's a pretty benign one. That's not one where I'm like super worried about somebody getting pulled in by the clickbaitiness of the title and it's somehow doing social harm. So that one, I roll my eyes at it, but I'm not too upset by it. As for home theater dying, no, definitely not. Obviously, home theater is not dying, but I do think it is changing, and I do see it stratifying a bit, and like basically the home theater equipment that we love, AV receivers, sometimes separate amplifiers, high performance speakers, high performance subwoofers, like I am seeing that all kind of move upward in price point as a general trend. And then so there's like a gap forming between how somebody gets into home theater and then what they're trying to get to. And those price points seem to be diverging and getting farther apart. And I'm not super happy about that sort of trend. It makes sense. I understand why it's happening, but I'm not super happy about that. I don't love the idea that so many people, the max they're going to get to is a soundbar. I loathe the fact that we're seeing these really expensive soundbars now, like $2,500 soundbars and stuff. Makes no sense to me, except for the fact that if you are trying to
People
put
want
together
them.
a
Yeah.
nice bunch of speakers and a AV receiver and dual subwoofers for $2,500, it's getting challenging. It's getting challenging to do that. Price points are going up there. So I don't love the stratification. I don't love the gap that's forming between entry level and what we're aiming for. I would like there to be a happier middle ground for us to be able to aim for. But yeah, it's certainly not dying.
No, it's not dying. And I did not write an article about home theater. I wrote an article about, what you call it, dying.
Projectors
dying. Yeah, specifically. Tom, not me, the different guy.
Mm-hmm.
First up, Tom does photo editing and photo printing, and he recently replaced his computer monitor. The new one is an Asus ProArt PA32-9 CRV,
even, yes.
which is a Honda, I guess.
It could be.
Professional monitor with UHD resolution, IPS LCD panel with LED backlighting, and display HDR 400 certification.
Mm-hmm.
He for sure wants to calibrate it for accurate sRGB and Adobe RGB color spaces, but he doesn't want to spend an arm and a leg, so I think he's already spent an arm and a leg, sounds like, this thing. So he's mostly been looking at Data Color Spider products, but he got to thinking, if he's going to buy a meter and software for his computer monitor anyway, wouldn't it be nice if he could also use them to calibrate his Epson 5040 UB projector in his home theater? Given that his most critical needs are accurate sRGB and Adobe RGB for photos on his computer monitor, the least expensive Spider X Pro is $145. Seems like it would meet those requirements, but if he wants to calibrate HDR, the more expensive Spider X2 Ultra, just $300, is apparently necessary. And then the X2 Ultra also says it's suitable for projectors, while the X Pro doesn't seem to mention projectors, just monitors. But from what you can tell, Data Color software does all of the calibration on the computer, not on the monitor or projector itself. So that wouldn't work for his Epson 5040 UB, since the whole point would be to use it with multiple sources, not just a computer that also contains the calibration data. It's left him confused as to what he should get and how much he really needs to spend here. Can we help him out? I cannot.
Okay, but I can. I have prepared for this. So I want to start by saying, for getting the best experience, both in terms of the final result accuracy of both your computer monitor and your Epson 5040 UB projector, and then on top of the end result experience, the actual user experience of going through the calibration process for both the monitor and for the projector, my recommendation would be to go with what has pretty much become the standard for calibration software these days, which is CalMan from Portrait Displays. You do not need anything more extensive than CalMan Home. CalMan Home is perfectly capable of doing everything you need to do as far as the calibration software itself goes. And then they have a quite reasonable bundle of CalMan Home combined with their own C6 HDR colorimeter for $450 total. Now that is well more expensive, of course, than that Data Color Spider X Pro at $150. We're well more expensive than that, but the user experience of going through CalMan, particularly for when it comes time to doing your Epson 5040 UB, because if you're going to do that with a Spider, you're going to end up with a quite manual process. You better know what you're doing for calibrating a consumer display to Rec 709 and Rec 2020. You better know what you're doing beforehand to go through the manual steps it would take for using software other than CalMan Home, which has been designed for home enthusiasts, as the name implies, and walks you through the process in a quite user-friendly manner. Even though there's still some details to go through with CalMan as well, it's a pretty user-friendly manner to do that. And the C6 HDR colorimeter is as good as it gets for consumers, because not only is it just a better hardware meter than the Spider meters are in terms of longevity and reliability and accuracy for the colors that it's measuring, with the C6, Portrait Displays also provides you with display-specific offsets. What do you do when it's a spectral radiometer? Profiling is what they call it. Profiling the meter so that it's really, really accurate to the native color points of your display. Portrait Displays has already profiled a gazillion displays out there, and it's just a drop-down menu. You choose your display type in the Calman software, and that C6 is ready to go. Super accurate. So it's worth the $450 price tag. Now, there is one other wrinkle, which is that to do the process on your Asus ProArt monitor, you're actually going to also want to get the Portrait Displays Client 3 PC software, which is another $50. The reason that you would want to do that is that the ProArt monitor doesn't necessarily have all the calibration controls like the user calibration controls you can access on an LG OLED or on your Epson 5040 UB. This allows you to automate to do the Calman automated process of calibrating your computer monitor, and it will automatically target sRGB and Adobe RGB, so it's worth the extra $50. But that means we're $500 in now, right? For the Calman solution from Portrait Displays, for the meter, and for the 2 pieces of software, we're at $500. I think it's worth it for something. It sounds like you're semi-professional in this. I think it justifies that price tag. But, of course, we're looking at spending more money than you were thinking of. Now, could you go with the Datacolor Spider X Pro? You could. You can actually use it with the Calman Home software. So the Calman Home software all by itself is $150. So now you're at $300 for the meter and the software. And the Datacolor Spider X Pro will, of course, come with the PC software, so you don't need to spend the extra $50. And the Calman software will do a pretty good job of working along with that Spider X Pro, and you can use the Spider X Pro to measure a projector. There's no reason that meter is unable to measure a projector. It just doesn't come with the software for doing like a consumer projector calibration, but the Calman Home software does provide that. So we're up to a $300 price tag there. I'm also going to include in the links for this question in our show notes. There's a video that I'm linking to that shows you basically what it looks like when you're connecting a colorimeter to a tripod and how you aim it at your projector screen, because you're going to take the reading off of the light that bounced off of the screen and then came back into the meter. So the way that you sort of line all that up, I've got a video for how to do that. The thing is, the Spider X Pro does not do HDR, and both your monitor and your 5040 UB do HDR. So if you want to do HDR, then you're looking at the Spider X2, and now that's $300 for that, and $150 for the Calman software, and we're at exactly the same price as just getting the bundle for the better C6 HDR meter. It's still a better meter than the Spider X2. So there's really no reason not to go with the Calman bundle at that point. The last thing I'll mention is there is another company, which is Calibrate. Their meter is basically based on the same OEM meter as that C6 HDR, but it doesn't come with all the profiles. And their software is very similar to the Spider software, which is that it's meant for your computer monitor. It's not meant for a home display. But the meter itself is better than the Spider meter. And the one you would want to get is the Calibrate Display Pro High Luminance. That gets you the HDR compatibility. So that's $280 there for the better meter and the software that'll do your PC, but then we're still going to be adding another piece of software to do your consumer display. And that could be Calman, or you can go with another piece of consumer display software, which is called Color Space Zero. And that goes for just $35. So there is a way to get this to right around the $300 mark and do everything you want to do with a meter that's better than the Spider, will calibrate HDR on your Asus monitor, and will calibrate your projector for, $305. That'd be the Calibrate Display Pro HL, and then the Color Space Zero $35 consumer calibration software. So those are sort of all the tiers that I would go with. Personally, though, I might just go bite the bullet and spend $500 to get the Calman package because it's the best user experience.
Okay. Mr. Jody, who doesn't want to be misgendered. So here we go.
Correct.
Jody has been using a 7.1 Pioneer AV receiver from at least 13 years ago. He's got a 5.1 speaker setup and isn't really intending on buying anything right now. The speakers are all a pair of PSB T20 towers, a matching C10 center, and a pair of P5 surrounds, all from the Alpha series. The subwoofer is Eclipse R110SW. He's never really felt the sound system has been properly calibrated. The Pioneer receiver has regular old MCACC, and he's hoping we can walk him through the best ways to set up and calibrate his system using what he has, or at least offer some tips to improve the sound quality he has now. 5.1, towers center, the subwoofer is, if I remember correctly, not phenomenal, but
it's not bad though. The reference series 10-inch sub. I mean, it's not 20 hertz. It's not pressurizing 20 hertz, but it's not bad. That's a half decent.
Has he told
sub.
us about his? Did I miss the part where he told us about his room? He hasn't.
We
right?
don't know what
don't know
the
anything.
room is. We don't know if it's enclosed. We don't know the dimensions.
So this, I mean, it's hard to know because this whole thing is like I want to tell you as little as possible, so you give me the broadest possible advice. And honestly, the broadest possible advice is already out there. You crawl for bass. But I mean, look, we can't assume that everybody knows all of that. Well, that's why I'm saying it out loud right now. So,
okay,
I've got articles on crawling for bass or how to set up subwoofers. Rob's got his 12-step subwoofer setup guide.
That's if you had dual subs, though. So
that's
don't
dual
in this
subs.
Case. Yeah.
So, as far my website has the Dolby, the why the Dolby diagrams are all wrong, which helps you walk it through. There's a speaker setup guide, placement 101 or home theater 101 speaker placement or something like that article on my website, which will talk about how to set up your speakers based on the location of your seats rather than anything else in the room. That will kind of help get you in the right direction. But the basic idea is, your center channel should be usually below, but can be above, usually below your TV. And if it's sitting on a piece of furniture, it should be pulled as far forward as possible so that the front of the speaker is just a little bit, not the front of the grill, the front of the speaker is just a little bit ahead of the front edge of the furniture. The front edge of whatever it's sitting on. If you could put a rug between you and that speaker, that's great. Your surround your front left and right speakers, yes, you can have them flanking your TV, but usually, if it's possible, you want to have them at least the width of your couch.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So that they are that wide. If your couch is super huge, well, that's what you're going to do.
The left speaker is to the left, even if just barely so, of like a 3-seater couch, and the right speaker is to the right of a 3-seater couch.
If you have a 3-seater couch. If you have a 4-seater couch, then you have to do it for the 4-seater. And then your surround speakers should be to your sides and
slightly behind you with a 5.
Slightly behind is preferable.
Yeah.
I know the Dolby diagrams are like it's dead straight to your sides, and that's okay in a 7.1 system. But that 5.1 system, I prefer them a little bit behind and a little bit above.
Yeah.
So your ear, so that each ear on the couch has a line of sight to the tweeter that's in the surround speaker.
That's right. And the surround speakers are just firing straight across the room at each other. That's there's no aiming, there's no angling. They're just shooting straight across the room at each other in a 5.1 setup.
And most of the time you can look at, again, AV Gadgets has articles on perfect toe-in, I think is the name of the article, or that'll get you there if you use the search function. And the toe-in will help adjust the angle of your front left and right speakers, which is not pointed directly at your face in the middle of the couch, which is what the Dolby diagrams look like. They're wrong. They know they're wrong. They ended up correcting them slightly, but they're still not as right as they should be. I would prefer if they just showed the speakers pointed directly into the room, because I think that's more right than having them pointed directly at your face. So, but usually there's just my speakers are directly straight out. I have played with the toe-in. I think they sound best with them directly straight out. There's also, if your speakers are placed very wide and you're having a hard time getting a phantom center image, then you can do what's called cross-firing orientation, which again, there's an article on AV Gadgets. Rob's talked about it a bunch, which you can do with your front left and right speakers where they're towed in dramatically, but that's unusual. So, and then subwoofers, you use the subwoofer crawl. I do have an article I just wrote, I think yesterday or the day before, kind of talking about what we talked about last week or the week before, where what to listen for when you're doing that subwoofer crawl. But basically the idea is that you put the subwoofer on your couch where your seat is in the middle.
And the tip here is that when you have a single subwoofer, we do have to just accept that we're trying to get the best response for one sub for one seat. The other seats in your room are not going to get an ideal bass response. There's really just no way to achieve that with a single sub. So we just have to get a mindset that we are really doing this in this scenario for one seat to have the best experience.
Yeah. And so you're really listening for press the wrong button. Stupid mouse.
We're going to be playing a bass sweep, a full bass sweep, 200 hertz down to 20 hertz on repeat. We're not going to be listening to just bass heavy music like so many subwoofer crawl guides suggest. We're going to be listening to a full sweep from 200 hertz down to 20 hertz, and that's going to be playing on repeat. And that's the thing you're going to go around your room and listen for the location where, as best you can, there's no big dips in that sweep. There's no large volume drops as that sweep plays.
Not worried about it being too loud. We're worried about it not being loud enough, basically.
Yeah. Although to some extent, with the limitations of basic MCACC, we are going to try, if you have some latitude in where that subwoofer can be physically placed in your room, we're going to go for the location that sounds as close to, hey, that sweep sounded like the same volume throughout the entire sweep. We're going to try to get as close to that as we're able to. That's our goal with that. So, I mean, that's laying the foundation. That's getting our bass as good as we can for at least the one seat that we primarily care about. That's our physical speaker placement. And having those physical things done properly is the absolute number one most important thing that you're going to do here, because your system doesn't have a tremendous amount of capabilities. And furthermore, the capabilities it does have, we do not fully trust to do a really good job in terms of trying to electronically compensate for poor speaker placement or poor subwoofer setup. We want to get the physical parts down as good as we can first. That's the major tip. I am going to say... Oh, sorry, Tom wanted to say...
Go ahead.
I'm going to say go ahead and run MCACC. The basic one only takes a single measurement position, so this is not complicated. But the thing is, there's a bunch of it that I don't trust. It'll set the distances to your speakers and your subwoofer pretty darn reliably, and I'm fine with the distances that it sets. It'll set the levels pretty darn reliably, and so I'm fine letting it do that. But it really wants to set speakers to large, so I would not be surprised at all, particularly your towers, but honestly, all 5 of your speakers might get set to large by the MCACC system. Don't leave it there. Manually change all 5 of your speakers to small. If any of them have been set to large, manually change them to small after MCACC has been run. And then it'll probably set an 80 hertz crossover because it almost always defaults to that. But if it did something weird and there's only a global crossover in basic MCACC, your speakers are capable of playing down to 80 hertz. Those PSB Alpha speakers, nice, capable speakers, and they're perfectly capable of playing down to 80 hertz. So if it set it to something weird, particularly if it set it lower than 80 hertz, manually set the crossover to 80 hertz. But then MCACC gives you the option of some different targets. You can choose what the equalization is in MCACC. And my recommendation to you is that the target you choose is not to fully turn MCACC 100% off or to never run it at all, but I would choose as the equalization off, which is one of the options. I would turn the equalization off because frankly, it doesn't do a terrific job. In my opinion, does more harm than good. But one of the options is you leave it on, so it's doing all of the other bass management and the time and the levels and all of that stuff is still set for you, but you turn the equalization off, and that is one of the options. So that'd be my tip to you.
So everything we've talked about is just setting up your speakers and running the initial calibration.
Yeah.
This is...
That can go a long way, though.
It can, but this is maybe 50% of what you... It's akin to saying, this is how all the buttons and your seat adjustment in your car work.
Sure.
And not telling you that you need to also put gas in it. And you know what I mean?
So there's... I think we've gotten
to
well
me,
more
I
than
think
50%
that the next thing the equally most important thing that you can be doing to make your system sound good, other than doing all these things is great, but you need to think about room acoustics. If you're not thinking about room acoustics and adding acoustical panels to your room, bass trapping, all the stuff that we talk about on this podcast quite a bit, then there's only so good it can get. But that
is an expense. And that is an addition to the system. And he doesn't want to do that right now, so we're going to do as much as we can just with what he has.
Just so that you know that when you spend money on acoustic treatments and treating your room, it is money that never needs to be spent again. They don't go bad. They don't lose their effectiveness. You can't really upgrade them to a better model, as new features come out. If they're 4 inches thick and they're 2 inches off the wall, that's it. That's about as good as it gets. If you've got corner traps, it's not like you can get better corner traps. Aside from going from foam to that doesn't really do anything to insulation, which does do what you need it to do, there hasn't been any improvements in bass trapping and room acoustics in the length of time that I've been doing this job. So, I would say improve. Yes, your AV receiver, you can get a better AV receiver with better room correction in it. But before I would even do that, I wouldn't even worry about your speakers all that much. Before I would do even that, I would think about room treatments.
Okay.
So let's do Dan and we'll be done.
Okay.
Dan says when he first started getting into home theater as home audio as a passion and a hobby, he quickly became one of those guys chasing after new cables, new amps, new DACs, and even the quirky stuff like cable risers and the Totem Beak, which is a parasitic resonance control device that just sits on top of your speakers to do something as long as you believe hard enough. It's like a cone that sits up there, if I remember correctly.
It's the very same thing as Magic Rock.
That tiny little clock they had for a while.
Sure.
Remember the tiny little clock? Anyways, Dan says he went along like that for decades, but eventually reality and the truth started becoming undeniable to him. Need decent speaker wire of proper gauge got the job done. Swapping out one component amp for another, one competent amp for another competent amp made no audible difference. The stuff we talk about week after week, year after year, all just started to line up with his own experience. And spending money on stuff that just wasn't improving the sound at all didn't make sense anymore. But he can't help feeling sometimes that he's lost something. Back when he was chasing cables and amps and DACs, it was just fun. Did he have blinders on? Was he more often than not fooling himself? Sure. But something about the ignorance, bliss, really was bliss, sorry. So his question to us is, how long into our audio journeys did it take before we started learning these things? And when we did it feel like a punch to the gut? Did it tarnish our passion for the hobby? And how long did it take to recover from that letdown if we ever did? So, I was very into home theater long before I started working in the industry, but I was also extremely poor. So this idea that, high-end cables and stuff like that made a difference was like saying to me right now, arguing or thinking about whether or not I would rather own a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. It makes no difference. I'm never going to own either one of them. So why? Who cares which one's 30 horsepower more powerful or whatever. So I never really got there. But when I did start working in the industry, I had a lot of my assumptions quickly challenged. Things like Harman Kardon having real watts versus not real watts sort of thing. I would say something like that, and I immediately have somebody to call me on it and say, "That's what are you talking about? That's not real. That means nothing. That's just marketing crap." So being around people like that, and I don't necessarily think that I ever felt that sort of let down.
Right.
But then again, I didn't invest anything in it either. Because when I got my first home theater system, I immediately wrote, I made my own acoustic panels. Let's take note to the guy before this, Jody, I guess, and wrote an article about it. And that's how I got my job working in the industry. So when I got my first system, I almost immediately started working in the industry. So I don't really think I felt like I had a lot of my assumptions challenged and corrected, but I never really invested anything monetarily or emotionally, which is really what the problem is here. I will agree with you that demystifying things does take the fun out of it for many people.
Some of the wide-eyed wonder, right?
Yeah, and I think that's, being able to say, oh my God, I'm hearing such a major difference between these speaker wires, makes it feel like you are, and don't be offended, Dan, by this, you are better than everybody else. Like, you are better. That you are hearing things that they can't possibly imagine,
Sure.
and you just feel superior, and that feels good. That does feel good. No, walking into somebody's home theater and going, "Yeah, I know mine's better, but whatever. This is this is pretty good." Even I went in the home theater the other day, and the speakers were in front of the front 2 rows of seats. In front of the surround speakers were in front of the first row of seats.
Okay, yes, so well in front of the second row.
I'm just like, geez, but. Even though we didn't really watch a movie or anything in there, I walked out and went, it probably sounds all right. It probably sounds okay. They had 1 subwoofer, not 2. It's an enclosed room. They had decent speakers. They had good speakers, actually. They had SVS's Prime,
Okay, sure.
Up front, and Prime satellites as their surrounds.
Yeah.
And I bet, the surround experience probably wasn't great. But it's still better than a soundbar. Still better than
built-in TV speakers.
Yeah. So
for sure.
It still was pretty good. So not being able to go and feel like, you don't understand because you have a lead ear, and you don't understand because you don't have the proper equipment that can really show the difference between speaker wire like I do. That superiority you feel from being from that you get from believing things that aren't really all that real, it goes away when you realize that most of that stuff was garbage marketing anyways.
So I started my really getting into audio and home theater in particular, because I never really went down the 2-channel route. That was not the thing that really got me into the hobby. It was home theater, and it was right around the time that The Matrix came out on DVD. So whatever that 1999, right? That's really when I started getting into it, and spending my own money and wanting to have my own surround sound system and those types of things. And that meant I was reading, it was print magazines at the time, right? I was reading whatever little information was available online at that time, but it was a lot different than it is now. Yeah. And the print magazines were still around. And so I was seeing a lot of these ads, and I was also there for because it was still CRT TVs when I started. Right. And then it was rear projection, right? Remember the rear projection, but the rear projection CRT TVs. Big old, CRT cannons inside of the rear projection, 500-pound televisions that were 42 inches in 4x3 screen size, right? That's when I was getting into that stuff, which meant I was right there for the introduction of HD. And I was right there for the rise of monster cable. That was a huge thing. Was the massive rise of monster cable and all the ridiculous marketing and the crazy price points that came along with that. I distinctly remember getting my very first progressive scan DVD player, a Toshiba progressive scan DVD player that I read all about in magazines, and at the a retailer that I was purchasing it from, I didn't have an optical audio cable at the time, and I needed to get one. And he laid out these 3 different optical audio cables at 3 distinctly different price points and was like, this is, I wouldn't really use it, and this one is good, and this one's the best. And of course, it was in order of price. Yeah. And I didn't really know what was going on, so of course I did what everybody does and got the middle one, right? At the time, which is exactly what that sales technique is designed to make you do. But I was reading all of the monster cable marketing. I, for a while, got really into Def Tech because Def Tech was brand new. Sandy Gross had just set that up, had left Polk Audio, was setting up Def Tech. And there was a gazillion marketing things about these tower speakers with built-in bass drivers and how the ideal was to have full range, sound coming out of every single speaker, which makes so much intuitive sense, doesn't it? If the signal is full range, why wouldn't you want every single speaker to also be full range and play that whole signal itself? Why would we be offloading any of that signal to a completely different cabinet somewhere else in the room if we didn't have to?
We had no idea where subwoofers went back then.
That's right.
We had no freaking clue. It's so hilarious.
And you certainly didn't have more than one,
No. If you did, they were right underneath your main speakers anyways.
You had these bipole towers, right? Drivers firing out the back. Isn't that going to make the room sound bigger? Isn't that going to be more spacious? There wasn't a hint about room treatments at this point in time. Had no idea about those. So I absolutely went down that path to some extent, following the marketing, because that was how I was getting educated, along with reviews, but I didn't know which reviewers to trust and which ones not to trust yet. That's sheer experience that ends
Yeah.
up teaching you that. And some of those reviewers are basically just marketing mouthpieces. So you see
Many
the
of them
marketing
are.
being reinforced by
sometimes
a reviewer.
purposefully and sometimes just because
Sure.
they don't know any better either, really.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that really I have to kind of, in a way, credit Monster Cable with really cluing me in, because the thing was, I did take electronics in high school, and I did start down like a basic engineering path when I was going into post-secondary, and I was like, these claims are bogus. This stuff about a coaxial cable somehow treating different frequencies differently, like it's going to go down a different strand of the center conductor at a higher frequency versus another different strand of that second conductor at a lower frequency. I'm like, no, this is bunk. This is straight up wrong, because I had some education on how electronics work, and I was seeing that, and I was seeing the ridiculous price points, and I'm like, this is nonsense. This is crap. But I was seeing reviewers like praising the difference in men. I was like, something's wrong here. Something not right about this. And then I actually got one of the Monster Cable power conditioners, right? I got swayed by the marketing and all that. And I will admit, I convinced myself when I connected it to my first plasma display that I ever had, I convinced myself that the black levels got a little bit better.
Yeah.
I will fully admit that. I thought that was true. And I would tell other people that that's the experience that I had. But this was around the same time that I had friends who had gone on from high school to start working at places that, had like full-on grading studios and things like that. And I started getting experience with like studio production and getting experience with blind listening comparisons and you can't call it blind viewing comparisons because you're seeing something, but not knowing which product was which, blind in that testing sense.
Yeah.
And that completely, that changed everything. That took what I already suspected and knew about Monster Cable's ridiculous marketing claims and really started to lay bare how pervasive that was in things that seemed intuitive and reasonable, and we're actually still bunk. And then of course the internet is rising at this time, and we're starting to get better information, and Harman's actual scientific research is starting to become publicly available, and it just snowballs from there and goes more and more. But did that feel like a gut punch to me? Did that become less fun, less wide-eyed enthusiasm for this stuff that I didn't fully understand before? I will straight up say it was the complete opposite for me. I got more excited the more scientific, the more disproving of these ridiculous marketing claims that I came across, the better I started understanding what was going on. That made me more excited than I had been when I didn't know. Because when I didn't know, I was aware that I didn't know. And I don't particularly like that feeling. I was aware of like, yeah, this is what they're saying it does. And I might even experience what the marketing, prepared me to notice. That's what happened with the black level, thinking that the black levels got better with the power conditioner. But I'm like, but I don't know why. I wanted to know why. Why? What? By what mechanism? That's the phrase. By what mechanism is this change happening? And very often the mechanism was inside of my brain and not what was actually coming out of the device once I started doing those blind comparisons. So I had the opposite reaction. I got more excited the more scientific I got.
Yes. Once you you decide that you realize that you've been wrong, you can now see all the other ways that you've been wrong.
Oh yes,
and that's where the excitement comes back.
The sense that like, you are getting closer to the. Look, I'm a person who believes in objective truth. I completely understand that there's perception, and that perception forms our understanding of reality, and there's no avoiding that. But I believe that there is an objective truth outside of perception, and the closer I feel like I'm getting to that, the happier I am, even though it might be completely polar opposite to what I thought before.
Yeah. Okay. Dan found an old review that I wrote for Audioholics. It was for the DefTech Mythos ST Tower speakers. That couldn't have been a review. Was it a review?
I mean, that's how he said it in the email, but I don't know for sure. I didn't look it up. I don't know. Might have been a preview.
First impression. Yeah.
First impression.
This is probably something we saw at a
trade show.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Mythos STS, is that what he says it is?
Mythos ST Towers, yeah.
Yeah, ST, yeah. So anyways, seems like I was pretty new to Audioholics at the time I read it and came across as really excited about them, but it seems like Tom is a lot less enthusiastic about those same DefTech speakers today. So that was almost, I remember seeing these at a trade show. Okay. So this was in January of 2008. I was very new to this. I was probably it was January at CES. Right? Isn't that
January would have been, yeah. CES,
yeah, that's CES. So I was at CES. I wrote this at CES. I also, so what this is what we call press releasing the press release. So this is a press release that I copy pasted into this, because this is how we used to do the coverage. We would take out any of the, so it all starts off with, it always starts off from the world acclaimed blah 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 blah, speaker
designer
manufacturer blah 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 blah.
Yes.
Yeah. Who's won these awards? Take all of that. So and so releases, and then the name of the speaker, and then there's a brief overview, and then there's a quote from the manufacturer. There's always a quote from the manufacturer. Take that out, and then the next paragraph take out any sentences that are clearly BS claims about how things should work or do work or whatever, but leave in any or qualify them in some way, so that the manufacturer claims, or in this case DefTech claims, leave in anything that's definitely factual, and then at the end, if I had an opinion, I would put an opinion in. Okay. That's how I ended up doing these. And whether or not I didn't read this one, so whether or not I did this one that way, I can't tell you. So that is how this would have worked. It's not a review, because a review would be different. I know I never reviewed DefTech. So does that feel like a form of disappointment or a lessening of the love and passion for audio equipment that we once had? Do we actually feel positive about it, because he's glad to no longer be wasting money on things that don't actually deliver any real value to him? But at the same time, he can't help but feel disappointed when it hits him that the amps and cables he has now are honestly as good as he will ever need. So the problem, spending money on your passions and engaging in your passion, in getting upgrades and making things better, even if it's just what they love to call in cycling marginal improvements or marginal improvements, often feels like you get that you're trying to get that dopamine hit of getting something new and really enjoying it. Yep. And that's much easier to do when everything you buy, no matter what it is and what it does, either gives you the ability to say, oh my God, it's like a veil has been lifted. Or, whoever reviewed this is an absolute liar. I tried it. Everything sounded worse. It was like veils were thrown over the top of things. It's always about the veils.
It is.
So you have that. Once you get rid of that ability to take everything in and make wild, unjustified claims about them, and then think, okay, well, now I get to go post stuff on the internet, when you realize you're like, well, it's got that amplifier's got all the power I need for this speaker in this room at this distance. That's why people on this podcast get so excited when they move.
Right? I've got a much bigger room and I
got a bigger room, or I got a smaller room, or I got a different room, or now I got to do this, now I got to do that. You're right. I can see where that sort of thing can somehow take the fun out of it. But at the same time, there is this, like, I just have this good thing. Like, how do you feel? Like, if someone were to give you a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or something like that, would you immediately go, I can't wait to get my next one? You'd be like, oh my God, I have a Ferrari.
Some people would. Some people would absolutely react that way.
those people are collectors and they have garages full of these things, but that's why they can't have garages full, because they want to try to have that same feeling that they had when they got that first really special car. Yeah. It's the same thing with you. Just enjoy the dang car. Just drive it. Just enjoy how good it looks, and instead invest in things like high quality content and, movie nights with your family and stuff like that. And then, hey, I've got acoustic panels in the room. They look great, or they function great, but they don't look so good.
Sure.
There's your upgrade.
Yeah.
Oh, I love, my new display, but wouldn't it be fun if there was like those Govee lights that, do all kinds of weird stuff behind them? I'm not going to use it very often, but that would be kind of cool for like, karaoke night, or, just listening to music in here where the video doesn't matter that much. There's things that you can do. But yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I can fully understand where you're coming from. But again, like on certain of these things, I just myself have pretty much the opposite reaction, because more or less I'm like, oh, awesome. I don't have to worry about that component anymore. Like these speaker wires that I have, that's it. I'm done. Don't have to worry about speaker wires anymore.
I know, right?
Like, it's like,
can you imagine?
Those are doing their job, and that's it. I'm good. And to me, that is a pleasurable thing to be able to say.
The pleasurable part of it, Rob, is that you no longer have to have FOMO.
Yes.
You're done with the FOMO.
I'm done with the FOMO, and
you're done with it.
And I'm done with the expense. And I'm also, because I am scientifically minded, I get the pleasure of, I just removed a variable. I just removed a variable from my testing scenario, and oh man, is it nice to remove a variable because we've got too many.
You keep upgrading your TV though. I mean, they keep coming out with better TVs at least.
Of course,
so there's that.
But we've got too many variables, and oh man, is it nice when we get closer to isolating the variables that we're actually testing. So yeah, that's a completely different mindset that I have on that side. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a worry that there's never going to be another thing to buy for your audio system or for your home theater. Like that's not a concern that I really have. Not the least of which, of course, is if you are in a period where there's nothing brand new that you need or want coming out, like there's content. there's always content that you have.
Let's all remember the man who's saying this has got like 3 receivers in the closet right now.
Oh gosh,
and a couple of extra TVs that probably don't even get turned on.
That's underselling it. I got well more than a couple spare TVs hanging around, not doing anything in my stupid apartment. So there you go. There's. You can take that money, you can take that same enthusiasm, that same retail therapy, that same dopamine hit, and just apply it to something else. It doesn't have to be.
If you want to spend some money, have I got the hobby for you? Let me tell you a little bit about cycling. Okay,
or
you're looking to spend some money.
We've got a monthly place that money could go. If you get enjoyment from us, monthly place that money could go.
There you go. See, think how much. You give us enough money, Rob will put you on speed dial. Or you put Rob on speed dial. Not me. Okay. Who we got left?
Just Ryan. Ryan was the only person left on the list. I threw in that like evergreen discussion topic that we might get to one day, but that was it.
All right. Next week, maybe you. Maybe not. Who knows? I want to thank our listeners of the week. I want to thank all of our people who've gone to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 132 patrons over at patreon.com/avrantpodcast.
That is for sure. Once again, patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donations. A big thanks to our 132 patrons over there. Thank you for your financial support.
I also want to thank Aaron for sending Rob a movie code to test out for him.
Thank you, Aaron.
And James for trying to help me out with my Dolby Vision stuff. But
it is nice when people are like, hey, maybe I got a way to help Tom out because Tom has helped me before. So yes, that is very nice. Good. Love that community thing. And thank you, James.
Yeah. We also want to thank those who send us notes of thanks, including Aaron, Jay, Mike, Karl, and Dan. Thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. I'll say those names one more time. Aaron, Jay, Mike, Karl, Dan. Thank you very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We definitely appreciate it. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.